Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to informal discussion of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Cody. I'm one of the co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Will.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Kate.
We are following the reading schedule from the Pynchon subreddit, and today is our part 2 episode on chapters 51 through 55 of Mason and Dixon. We are referring to this now officially as our cursed episode, or episodes at this point. We have experienced really any number of just ill luck and misfortunes that have delayed our ability to record. So it's been this has been a lot of fun, but we're getting through. We're gonna go over some of the things that we didn't touch on in the previous episode on these chapters. We're gonna get Kate's perspective on a lot of these sections that we did already talk about and just didn't have her at the time. So we'll see what else could possibly go wrong. We've already spilled things. We've had schedules shifted. We've had a couple of bizarre phone calls that have kept us away. Really, at this point, you name it, we've experienced it, and we're just waiting for what's going to happen next.
My internet went out a second before we started recording. It's just continuing on and on and on. And at this point, I'd like us to be done so that my life can go back to normal, because most of this seems to be adversely affecting me in particular.
Yeah, you're definitely getting the brunt of it.
Yeah.
I guess this is our apology, dear listeners, because I'm sure you expected us to be done with this episode 3 weeks ago, as did we.
Expected and hoped. So let's we'll avoid doing a recap because we did that last time, and I think that's where this all started. So
we'll just kind of yeah, it's definitely not worth risking again.
It's not, yeah. We'll just kind of dive right in. So actually, I guess we'll start. Kate, was there anything in particular that you wanted to go over in these chapters?
I mean, I think that a lot of the stuff that you guys talked about, especially prior to the change from frame narrative of, Cherry Coke storytelling to the section from the Ghastly Fob, is all pretty comprehensive. I think we can all agree that everything prior to 53 is significantly less complex and involved, I guess is the word I'll use, to everything post 53. So I feel like from that, that first section there, we're probably pretty good, unless there's specific stuff that you guys have. Like, I couldn't really, listening back to the episode after it was released, I couldn't really find anything necessarily to add to that, because I couldn't locate any folklore on whether or not there was a glowing Indian or, all of that. And we pretty much exhausted the cave, outside of the idea that, this is the first time you have Mason experiencing some sort of religious beauty that is inherently associated to the ground as opposed to the sky. So he's gaining a new perspective on this kind of deistic worldview that he's coming to over the course of this book. And that he's finding some sort of religious beauty now in what is below him instead of just above him, I think is pretty poignant for that. But I can't really think of anything beyond necessarily that thought or idea that hasn't been covered from the beginning. Post 53, I think, is where you guys have a lot of stuff to also add.
There was a couple things from 51 I wanted to kind of go over a little bit that I didn't go over last time. I mean, the opening paragraph I find kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not 100% sure on the difference between America and other places, but I know that here in America, cryptids are a big thing, and it does seem to kind of, the first paragraph does seem to kind of play on that. I remember whenever I first moved to Texas, we were like out camping one night when I was in college, and we started talking about different like kind of Texas folklore, Texas myths as it relates to kind of weird creatures and stuff. I'm just not really aware of. Say that again.
Did you go snipe hunting?
No, we were just camping. Yeah, I've never really been hunting, sadly, but I don't think that's a big thing in other countries as much that they don't have cryptids. It seems like every area of America has like their own kind of thing with that. And then there's a few things I wanted to say about the cave. We do know that Pynchon himself walked the Mason-Dixon line. I've seen it referred to as happening in the 70s. I do find it interesting that Mason and Dixon are told about the cave 6 miles south of the line, or that it lies 6 miles south of the line. I could see Pynchon walking the line and going to, stopping at one of the towns or stopping to talk to somebody, and somebody's like, "Oh, you got to check out this cave," and that kind of being the origin story of that.
Well, especially with it being mentioned in the actual journal, and that's where Pynchon gets a lot of the like specific verbiage that he uses to describe it. I could even see him like reading it in the journal first and then wanting to check with like townsfolk or whatever until he heard about a cave somewhere.
Yeah, no. Well, it really stands out in the journal.
It does, yeah.
So,
and then also, I did find it interesting that there's writing on the walls of the cave. I did kind of think, it's having been to a few kind of places like that myself, there's usually graffiti covering that kind of stuff, those kind of locations. Yeah. Which could be part of the inspiration for that. I did some kind of cursory exploration of this, and maybe one of our readers or listeners can correct me, but I'm not aware of any East Coast or even kind of Midwest Native American tribes having written language, at least by this time, the time Mason and Dixon is set. Which does implies a few different things. It could obviously be some type of forgery or hoax, the writing on the walls of the cave. It could be some type of ancient civilization type thing, like prehistoric civilization, which is always interesting to think about, and something that Pynchon does get into some, and at least against the day. I know I'm blanking on other stuff. If he gets into it in there, but the prehistoric civilizations and all of that, I think it comes up in the next few chapters. Before the end of this section, at least, they come across some like hills or mounds that are artificial, that are real. Those are real in real life. I've seen stuff on the internet about it, where there are these like mounds that I think are in the shape of snakes that are obviously artificial and were created at some unknown point. I think well before Europeans arrived in America, even well before, even the Americans that arrived before Columbus, or the Europeans that arrived before Columbus, it would have been before they arrived as well. I want to say that comes up pretty quick. So it's just kind of interesting to me that kind of stuff kind of goes through this last section of the book, the kind of lead up to the ending. This kind of stuff about how we don't really know the history of America very well, like before Europeans got here, and there's still a lot unknown. That's pretty much all I had to say about that. I did look a little bit into the history of coonskin caps. There's not the Wikipedia page for it is kind of a little bit lacking, but it does mention that Pynchon mentions coonskin caps in V, and I guess that coonskin caps were like a big fashion item in the 1950s, which apparently Pynchon was kind of commenting on. So that is a bit of a callback to V, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the cave drawings, because I was when I was trying to find info on the particular cave that was mentioned in both in Mason's journal and in the book, which, as Brett pointed out last episode, was that cave was actually destroyed, which is sad but not terribly surprising. But I did find that it wasn't specific to this cave or even this region, but I stumbled across an interesting article about cave art, Native American cave art, and they were talking about how certain I don't know if it was a specific tribe or multiple tribes had developed a form of cave art that was a very, very, very rough precursor to animation, and it would essentially work based on the way that shadow was cast using fire that would be obviously lit somewhere in the cave. And so the way they would draw the paintings on the wall when the firelight was flickering and creating its own light off and on, it would cause this sort of illusionary form of animation that could be used. And I thought that was really interesting to think about in the context of how Mason and Dixon both kind of experienced this cave art and the kind of feelings that it gives them. And if it was something like that, maybe just the way the light was coming in from outside, if there's trees moving or something and it's kind of casting shadows, it can give it that same sort of animated kind of look.
Yeah, that is interesting.
See, I interpreted most of the writing as metaphorical in the discussion of the cave. He looks at the cave walls and he sees these tiny scratches and breakages and clefts in the walls, and his eyes can kind of make out letters, but they're not there. They're not real. He doesn't think they're real. It's kind of like a constellation in the sky, which I think Brett kind of pointed out in his correspondence last week. But then I took his later realization of the to quote text, the monology of text. That seems to me as more of a realization of time, because it doesn't seem like he's really thinking about the cave itself per se as having written on it the chapter, the subterranean cathedral, or the lesson grasped. It seems more like he's talking about Earth or the universe or time in some sense.
Well, I think that the other interesting thing about what you're mentioning there, Will, is it kind of jives with what is actually in Mason's journal itself, like as far as his wording about time in particular. Because as you were talking, it was bringing it back to the forefront of mind, and I went and pulled this actual entry from his journal, where it says, "We went to see a cave near the mountain about 6 miles south of Mr. Shockey's. The entrance is an arch about 6 yards in length and 4 feet in height. When immediately there opens a room about 45 yards in length, 40 in breadth, or 7 or 8 in height. Not one pillar to support nature's arch. Their divine service is often, according to the Church of England, celebrated in the winter season. On the side walls are drawn by the pencil of time, with the tier of the rocks, the imitation of organ pillar columns, and movements of a temple, which, with the glittering faint light, makes a whole and awful solemn appearance, striking its visitants with a strong and melancholy reflection, that such is the abodes of the dead, thy inevitable doom, O stranger, soon to be numbered as one of them. From this room there is a narrow passage about 100 yards at the end, which runs a fine river of water. On the sides of the passage are other rooms, but not as large as the first." So, like, even then, he's talking about the progression of time and, like, the lineage of the dead that is in this cave and those who are going to join them afterwards. So I think when looking at what he's getting at, I think a lot of it is very metaphorical to the things you're talking about, which I think comes from whatever epiphany Mason himself had.
It did just now occur to me that the fact that they do church in the cave, would, and this comes up, I think, in chapter 55 a bit, or like the discussion of religion, but it could be, I mean, this is probably a bit of a stretch or more than a bit, but, a big part of my adulthood, in terms of my views on Christianity and my Christian upbringing, was realizing how much Christianity took from pagan religions, and I just find it interesting that they're doing church in a cave, which it's not growing up, I grew up in the Church of Christ, and a big part of that is the church building, and the church building being a place of like being sacred in and of itself, and it just kind of maybe reminded me of a more pagan type of view of doing church out in the wilderness or something.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's conspicuously close, this allusion to it's kind of an allusion to a fourth wall breaking from Mason there at the end of chapter 51, and then we do have an actual breaking of the fourth wall, I guess, if you want to call it that, in chapters 53 and onward. And it seems very conspicuous that it's right there. It's at 51, and then there's just another chapter that, you know, we're calling it a straightforward chapter. You know, it's Pynchon.
Yeah.
It's pretty convoluted, but for the rest of the book, it's pretty normal. Chapter 52. It's not out of place at all. However, the fact that there's this massive "we are the text" on the pages of a book, and this is a chapter about the subterranean chapel, like that's really heavy-handed, except that it's not at all leading into the actual subversion of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that interesting, and I cannot derive any meaning from that at all, but it's right there.
I mean, the only thing that I could really think of that would be, and this only just now occurred to me, so I'm going to try my best to articulate this in a way that comports with the reality of the thought, but it could be some allusion to the idea of, especially with Mason and Dixon being told that they're background characters to a story that doesn't really involve them, and the fact that we have this frame narrative of someone telling a story that might be contained within the Ghastly Fop, or vice versa, which is a printed work, that it is going into this idea of further down the line in time, the way that history is told, how it's written down in text format, is breachable in certain ways, or isn't necessarily reflective of what truly happened in other ways. And then as a transitionary point from that to where we are literally breaking the fourth wall and going into very meta-narrative directions, it is an illustration of that idea that whether the story of Mason and Dixon, as we are reading it, is within the pages of the Ghastly Fop within its own universe, or vice versa, that is some fracturing of reality to the story that actually occurred, which proves that it's malleable and changeable, as all things with history and the way that it's told after they happen are. Especially when you're dealing with chapters that have a lot to say about the powers that be and the things that are sort of behind the scenes, as the Jesuits are rumored to be for most of the book prior to this section, if that thought process makes sense.
Yeah, I can. It's hurting my brain to think about it, but I get where you're going with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just digesting that. I don't think I'll have a response before the end of the episode recording. But
Well, I want to start, I guess, because we kind of all discussed it, but we didn't really get, obviously, Kate's perspective. Was there anything in particular, before we kind of get, into a more detailed and granular discussion of these chapters, Kate, was there anything like overall that you wanted to talk about with these chapters?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my favorite quote, if I had been present for the previous episode, would have actually been the undelivered sermon quotation from the Reverend Which Cherrycoke that's at the beginning.
I absolutely love that, yeah.
Which I'll just read here. The ascent to Christ is a struggle through one heresy after another, riverwise upcountry into a proliferation of sects, and sects branching from sects unto deism, faithless pretending to be holy and beyond, ever away from the sea, from the harbor, from all that was serene and certain, into an interior unmapped, a realm of doubt, the nights, the storms and beasts, the falls and rapids, the America of the soul. Doubt is the essence of Christ, of the 12 apostles. Most true to him was ever Thomas. Indeed, in the Acta Tomei, they are said to be twins. The final pure Christ is pure uncertainty. He has become the central subjunctive fact of a faith that risks everything upon one bodily resurrection. Wouldn't something less doubtable have done? A prophetic dream? A communication with a dead person? Some few tatters of evidence to wrap our poor naked spirits against the coldness of a world where mortality and its agents may bully their way wherever they wish to go. I've really enjoyed all of the selections from Cherrycoke's undelivered sermons or his day book that have shown up in these chapters. I think that they're some of the most profound stuff for the chapters they're put into. And I think it's not hard to draw a distinction between what is being talked about in this quotation and what you then see as you follow the narrative of this woman kidnapped by the Jesuits. Because ultimately, Cherry Coke's point is this idea that trying to get to Christ, whether that's salvation or a pure version of the Christian church or whatever definition you'd want to apply to it, in a world that has an increasing number of, sects or, different subsets of belief to the religion, it just gets to be a more arduous journey. That's his whole first half of it. And within that, you're going to have all of these different people who are faithless pretending to be holy. So they're all self-assured of what it is that they're doing. And then Pynchon gives us that exact thing in the Jesuit school and behaviors that we see them engage in over the next couple of chapters. Because through any, I'll say, accurate reading of the Bible, you would not come away with the idea that what the Jesuits are doing is at all, acceptable or within the bounds of what a true believer of Christianity based on its biblical text would allow. And yet the Jesuits themselves are so certain of that which they hold to be true, and that what they are engaging in to the extreme ends of what they're trying to do and what they are engaging in from a behavioral perspective are so outside the bounds of it, but they think it's the right thing to do, and they're absolutely certain about it, even though their actions would testify to the opposite. And then in that second paragraph, you have this idea that it is the absence of doubt and the idea in a very subjective, true reality with no questioning or room for doubt that leads you down those roads. And that's exactly the perspective that the Jesuits have to be in order to operate in the way that they do. So Pynchon gives you this kind of micro sermon that if you wanted to spread out into a whole 45-minute thing, like Cherry Coke probably did if it was real, you could, and he shows you exactly what he's talking about over the rest of the chapters. If you're looking for that connection, that this is a wholly self-sufficient, completely sort of high on their own supply, with no doubt religious organization that thinks at the top of this sort of ascension to Christ, but is actually just another heretical belief system that claims to be within it. And that kind of stuff is all over the New Testament if you were to actually read it. So there's a whole, extended religious thing that I could get into with that. But I think it's such a genius illustration that even when you're just looking at the broader idea of what Pynchon is doing with these two aspects of it, just this quote and then kind of the setting and storytelling there, even without all the crazy stuff that we talked about last week and that we'll talk about that's within that has all sorts of different meaning, even just his outlay of what he's doing has just as much meaning and intensity as the rest of it.
That's a great exegesis, I'd say. What I really love about that section that you read there is just in that first half, and it's only used as a tool to deliver the rest of what you were what you just explained. But this is something that I, as far as I can remember, I think it was introduced to me by this book, this framing of epistemology, and by inversion, faith, knowledge scales with confidence, and faith relies on a lack of true confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I love that the topographic framing of epistemology there that he uses with the sailing out into the unknown away from the safe shores.
Yep.
It's an image that he brings up a bunch in this book and all of his other larger works, and I think it's a beautiful image that's very, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. And just the way that he so also effortlessly changes his writing style from what it's been for, however many pages we've gone through at that point, to something that is within the same overall pastiche of this 17th century English, but is clearly different and is a narrative, like you would read within a book. A lot of people talk about the shock of that change, but I actually found it to be very elegant, and that I knew something else must be going on, but it wasn't until later on that he actually reveals his hand as far as what he's doing. Like that, I can see that going wrong in so many ways for other authors who maybe aren't as considered in the way that they're going to do it. So to pull that off while also getting into the topographical changes that he's doing and all of the intense thematic work that he's going to do over the next 3 chapters it's just another one of these moments that we talk about all the time about just how impressive of a writer he is.
I do find the quote "doubt is of the essence of Christ" really interesting. I mean, doubt is in some ways an aspect of faith, but it's in other ways the opposite of faith. And I do think that for for a significant percentage of modern Christians, doubt is not viewed as being part of the essence of Christ. From my own experiences, people close to me's experiences with various churches, various youth ministers, and other types of ministers, doubt is very rarely encouraged. I don't think it's universally discouraged. I would like to, I do have some friends, and there are Christians I know, even Christian leaders I know, who maybe don't encourage doubt, but do tell you, you shouldn't ignore the doubts. At least it's not completely hopeless, I guess. But I do think it's a heavy majority of people would push back on that quote pretty heavily.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I do also think, I mean, the wouldn't something less doubtable have done is very interesting. I mean, a prophetic dream, that does come up in the Bible a fair amount. Even the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, although it's not clear if that's a dream or not, and it can be interpreted in a few different ways. I mean, it seems to be framed more as visions rather than dreams. But that does come up. I want to say it's Joseph or the son of Joseph. I can't remember. That's a big part of the Old Testament is dream interpretation and prophetic dreams. But the communication with a dead person, I'm not aware of. I mean, Kate can probably speak to this a lot more expertly than I can, but I'm not really aware of that being contacting the dead being ever having been a part of Christianity. It does kind of strike me as perhaps an oblique reference to the seance in Gravity's Rainbow. I did find some of these details really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can attest to my own time within the liturgy that certainly doubt is not encouraged and is often seen as a problem. It was one of the things that was actually contentious between me and the people that I was in the liturgy with, because when I had classes, I encouraged people to have doubt and ask questions, and didn't shut down people who had it. From a standpoint of the thing about a dream interpretation, you're right. Super big part of the Old Testament. It is Joseph that you're thinking of, who was having prophetic dreams about the coming famine and aspects of his family. And how it would change and how they would at some point bow down to him. As far as the resurrection of the dead, outside of the conceptual resurrection when Jesus returns, there is nothing positive spoken about it. There is one instance in which King Saul decides to go to a witch to have the prophet Samuel resurrected so he can receive counsel from Samuel. And when Samuel is resurrected out of Sheol, after that happens, he more or less yells at King Saul for doing it in the first place, and then tells him that for doing so, he's going to lose his kingdom and it's all going to be destroyed, because he would do something that is so against the will of God as go visit a witch to bring up a dead person. So that's really the only instance where that actually happens. Any other time where it's spoken about, it is usually as a prohibition of some kind.
So between y'all's exchange there, you brought to mind 2 things. Firstly, the idea that Thomas, I think, is evoked here because his epithet is Doubting Thomas.
Absolutely.
And in modern evangelical churches, at least in North America. The way that Doubting Thomas is said is with a certain degree of spite that I find utterly
Not
perplexing.
positive.
It doesn't make sense when
Yeah.
you understand the tone that he's given that name with in the New Testament.
Right. At least 90% of people who are probably preaching in the country of America right now have at some point or another given or heard a sermon about how Thomas is a bad guy.
Yeah, I've definitely sat through a couple of those.
Yeah, I have
Same.
to.
Same.
Oh, and furthermore, the other apostle who's known particularly for doubting is Peter, and he is viewed as the fundament to the Catholic Church. So yeah, that contradiction is just incredible in modern American society, at least.
Right, yeah.
But beyond that, where you point to Gravity's Rainbow, Luke, I noticed that it's contrasted to the prophetic dreams. Communicating with the dead person is contrasted to prophetic dreams, and that is a major part of Against the Day.
Mm-hmm.
The Traverse family have a huge number of very important prophetic dreams. In fact, I would say that most of the actual plot in the book happens through prophetic dreams.
Yeah.
So there we have some more intertextuality.
It's interesting that he evokes his two other large books in that same sentence.
Well, beyond the first paragraph, Kate, do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the major outlay stuff you guys definitely nailed in the last episode. Obviously, there wasn't a whole lot of time to get into everything, which is why we're doing this in the first place. But I think that a lot of the major stuff, if a listener has listened to the first part of this, they've got a lot of it. I think that there's some interesting continuation of the themes about the way that history is told and whether or not it's all fictionalized or partially fictionalized, and then it changes depending on who's telling it and who is the one who wrote the official history, and that kind of game of telephone in the decision to merge a fictional book series with a real life series of events that are being told, but also contained within a fictional novelization of those events that is on a shelf in a bookstore. Those are obviously very postmodernist, and this is probably ideally the kind of most pomo section that we've gone through in anything of Pynchon's that we've read for this podcast so far. But I would think that's another thing that kind of looking at the overall basis of these chapters, the way that he is cleverly continuing to build on this idea of who gets to tell history, who tells the authorized version, how accurate it is, by having this moment where we're sucked out of it, but maybe not, into something that is deliberately fictional and has been referenced so many times by the characters prior to it actually showing up. I think that's another example of just how clever he is in structuring these chapters and what he's going for in a way that is still very approachable.
So, do any of you have any solid theories on the structure of that? Is the ghastly fop? Did Cherry Coke read the ghastly fop and he's riffing on it? Is it just convergence? Is it magic in a narrative sense?
See, I've been thinking on it since our last conversation, and I can't say I have any concrete proof. I don't know that there is any to support any of those. I think they're all valid theories, but I kind of lean more towards it's his sort of fan fiction of an existing story. But again, it really, like, any of those is perfectly plausible and supported within the text, but I don't think any one of them is more valid than the other necessarily.
I do think it's interesting that the word fop itself seems to kind of bring to mind, once I looked up a definition, because I definitely had to. It brings to mind like kind of a parody or a caricature in and of itself. And then the possibility of this book that we're reading, as Brett said in his email, he likes to view it as I forget the exact wording. He likes to view it as a parody of the Ghastly Fop series written by Cherry Coke. I do think that that is interesting to think about. The fact that the word fop kind of brings to mind somebody that maybe a bit clownish or larger than life, but maybe not in a good way. A bit too big for his breeches or whatever. I don't know. I found that interesting to think about.
Well, and I think to a certain extent, the intention is for these different interpretations to all be equally valid. I don't think necessarily that there's an intention where one of them is supposed to be true and one of them is supposed to be not definitively. I think that that's, if anything, that supports the idea that we all tell a different variation of history in everything that we do.
Mhm.
The idea that people are going to come away from the book with a different interpretation of what is told within it is sort of the same thing that a historian does when they read a book of history or study something anthropologically. I think yeah, I think it's hard to give like a solid one answer or another to that question, Will, because you could see it as just sort of a like shifting perspective, because also it's different people reading the Ghastly Fop in the house versus Cherry Coke, telling the Mason and Dixon aspects. Maybe there was just an issue of the Ghastly Fop that included some of the Mason and Dixon characters in it. It's very hard to like land on what one of them is. I think the most interesting one would definitely be if this has all just been the Ghastly Fop the entire time.
Yeah.
But I think it's very hard. It's very hard to pick which one it is. The person who wrote up the recap for the Reddit page for this group discussion brought up Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and that is very similar to the vibe of these couple of chapters as it relates to the weird merging of narratives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I agree. I do think it's very clearly supposed to be ambiguous at the very least, if not an active denial of the idea of coherence. But I like to come up with big stupid theories.
No, of course. I just spelled one out like 10 minutes ago.
Oh yeah. Well, and so this is one that's been simmering in the back of my mind for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And it is that, and I haven't brought it all together. There's still a lot of loose threads. But first of all, FOP as an acronym has a bunch of possible meanings. I don't think any of them are particularly relevant. There's one that I think I've seen people online point out before is factors of production.
I've heard that one, yeah.
Yeah, beyond that one, none of them ring as resonant. However, I do sort of like the idea that the Ghastly Fop is in some sense America. In that pretentious way, where the Ghastly Fop is this guy who's hung up on the accounting, and he's going around settling the debts, and he's willing to use violence and whatever lascivious methods he has access to settle those debts. And he acts across the world, and so many people see him, and some of them just go, oh, what is the term? Oh, much too ghastly for me. Look at I guess contemporaneous to the authorship of this would be the Gulf War. With the U.S. being interventionist. And that kind of ties in with the whole overall theme in Gravity's Rainbow of, broad technology and Western European culture pushing us toward something pretty fundamentally ghastly. I think there's a world in which you can frame the ghastly fop as something that is real in our world. And this is a story that part of the ghastly fop because it's a story about Mason and Dixon. And inside of Mason and Dixon, we have the story that is the ghastly fop that they're telling each other.
Yeah, no, that's I hadn't really see my understanding of the word fop has always been I think it was used as a like a term for a fashionable person or someone obsessed with fashion.
Foppish dandy.
Yeah, like a dandy person. So I am looking that up right now, and I have to share this with y'all in real time because I just learned about this. Guys, there's a thing called fop rock.
What?
It specifically says a more recent and minor trend is fop rock, a form of camp in which the performers don 18th century wigs, lace cravats, and similar costume elements to perform. I am going to share a picture with you guys that I just saw and is something I need to see in person now.
Is there a band called like the Minutemen that does that? I want to say.
They're not mentioned on here. They do mention Adam and the Ants, which kind of makes sense, and Falco, Rock Me Amadeus makes sense. The Minutemen I'm thinking is like D Boone and the punk band from the 80s.
I just looked it up. I think I have it wrong.
But holy crap, this is something I need to look more into this because I don't think this is the definition of fop that we're working with here. I think Will's more accurate in that definition. But I was just, in looking at what I always understood fop to be, I learned about this. So this is a new thing now.
No, I mean, I'm not arguing against that basic understanding of fop, or even just the basic understanding of the ghastly fop as the story within the story.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I think the way you took it is more accurate to what I think the book is getting at than this definition of fop. I don't think it really, in the book, it has anything much to do with fashion.
Well, there's a lot of talk about fashion in the book.
That's true, and there is a lot of the what was the revolution that they keep bringing up? And I can't think of the name of it now. There's a flashback to it in these chapters now that I'm thinking about it, where Mason's going back to it.
Yeah, the Jacobite rebellions and the Luddite rebellions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always interpreted the word fop in this book as being about somebody who is overly concerned with fashion and their appearance, which I do think kind of plays into. I want to say it was pretty recently on Reddit. There's been, I don't know why I keep on seeing stuff about it, but stuff about like Yankee Doodle Dandy and Yankee Doodle and all that stuff. And I do think that there's an aspect of, because it has the word dandy in it. I do think there's an aspect of that song where it's making fun of Americans for being overly concerned about their appearance, which is weird that trend has persisted into the present day from the 1700s. If I'm picking up if I'm correct about all of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you listen to British radio, they'll refer to like having braces and whitened teeth as American teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily with disdain or anything, but that's just how it's referred to. But the fop rock thing is like, it's like the exact conceptual opposite to bands like Deathbeak.
This is how I feel like Jethro Tull probably should have dressed every time they did.
They were toeing the line with
I'm not
what
sure
they were doing
for them.
It just feels like this should be the natural conclusion of what they were already doing.
Well, I think they did dress up like that for Thick as a Brick.
They might have. They leaned into it a little bit. I don't know if they went this far into it, but they should have if they didn't.
I'm having a hard time not looking at this photograph. It's so
I just pulled it back up. I'm very curious about the drummer. As a drummer, I know how difficult it is to play in a variety of clothing. So I'm very concerned for that person.
I can't play drums in shoes at all, let alone if there were shoes like this dude up front playing guitar is wearing. I don't know.
Yeah. I always had to play in shorts. I could not play in like, unless it was freezing cold, I could not play in like jeans. My legs couldn't move the way I needed them to.
Oh yeah, same. I would need to wear. I would need to be barefoot, and I would need to be wearing shorts.
Anyway, we got a little bit in the weeds there, but so yeah, I think the kind of I have to go back a little bit to I think it was Kate that mentioned the kind of general consensus of there being a sort of whiplash in going into this chapter. But I would agree that I don't see it that way. A lot of the people that I was reading comments on like Reddit and a few other places, and it gets mentioned all the time is, chapter 53 is just this it's such a sudden shift and on, but yes, it is a different approach to the storytelling, and it's noticeably different. But I don't think it's such a drastic change that it stops everything that's going on in the book and makes you want to put it down. It's not that kind of thing. I think it does blend pretty well into itself, and it's to its own benefit. And again, I think as Kate mentioned, that, I am hard pressed to think of another writer who could make that transition work like that.
I can't think of any who would.
Percival Everett might be able to. From what I've read of his, he has that kind of polyphony available to him.
Yeah, and to go back to the Illuminatus trilogy has some aspects of that where it dips in and out of different narratives and different voices come in and out of the narrative. It's not quite as, because this Pynchon, it starts off with a chapter break and we're in a completely different place. But Illuminatus kind of does it just within like from paragraph to paragraph.
Yeah.
Well, it actually reminds me the only book I can think of that does a similar maneuver, and I'm not as well read as I'd like to be. So if anyone else, any listeners, have any ideas, any suggestions for points of comparison, please email us or send us comments. Is I guess Don Quixote is the way that he finds the book about himself in the second half of Don Quixote.
Oh yeah, the way the second half starts. Yeah.
Well, and in particular, the way that if anyone's read it, the way that the Duke and Duchess try to manipulate him, and if you read Don Quixote as Cervantes in those scenes, you see Cervantes as essentially degrading the whole concept of taking a character from the author.
Yeah.
But entirely through that kind of narrative dynamic.
If I remember correctly, he is doing some of that taking a world. Somebody had attempted to publish a follow-up to Don Quixote and say that it was his work, and him finishing or writing the second part was in response to that person doing that. And so it was included in there as like a direct assault on that person's idiocy for doing so and claiming to get away with it. I could be misremembering that, but I feel like that was something I read in a critical edition of Don Quixote at some time in the past.
Yeah, I think that's, as far as I understand, that's correct. I wouldn't have drawn that connection if not for that background, I guess.
There is also a bit of Pynchon being preternaturally aware of developments in history that would come later in telling a narrative about the Catholic Church kidnapping a native or indigenous person for use in Catholic schooling. That was something that obviously did go on, but I don't think that many people became aware of that until significantly after this book was published. I mean, they just figured out about some of the like orphanages a couple of years ago that were part of Catholic traditional schooling practices.
Yeah, that comes up in, I want to say it's the most recent episode of Reservation Dogs, which is a great TV show.
Yeah, it is.
I wouldn't be surprised if Pynchon knew about the residential schools and stuff. But yeah, it's really the depths of the horrors that have come out more recently.
something I forgot to mention in the last episode. I know I touched on the use of color that is scattered throughout here, and beautifully so. And I mentioned a few of those specifically, kind of brought up the examples of that. But I missed one that, while it was related to the color mention, it also goes back to our previous conversations about the use of crystals throughout here. So on page 516, there's a mention of a great green prism of Brazilian tourmaline. And I want to just kind of read the section in which it's included, because I was looking into tourmaline and its associative properties for, the people who are into that. So the section reads, a coordinator in single-breasted sutan or cassock of black Bruges velvet and lined with wolverine fur stands upon a small podium before the set of ebony handles and indicators trimmed in brass, whilst the Chinese attend to the rigging, and specially trained Indian converts tend to peat fire so as to raise precisely the temperature of a great green prism of Brazilian tourmaline, a snarl as Medusa with plated copper cabling running from it in all directions, bearing the pyroelectrical fluid by which everything here is animated. So tourmaline is it's said to create a powerful flow of energy to all parts of the body and is the best healing stone for the physical heart, which, knowing that after reading this section, then rereading it and kind of imagining it as being the essentially heart for what they're creating here, and that flowing out energy that we're seeing ties perfectly into that use of tourmaline. So we have another example of that use of the crystal properties that have come in that I was never really terribly familiar with to begin with, but I'm learning more and more about as we read through these and find those examples.
Yeah, I which I think builds on this kind of recurrent theme of spirituality or deism alternative to traditional Christianity being natural.
Mm-hmm.
The bringing up of, rose quartz, or in this case tourmaline, or the usage of astronomy for astrological purposes rather than strictly scientific ones, and the idea that there has to be something true to it because Mason and Dixon are all over each other's charts, and there is some reality to what it predicts within this book anyway. And you have stuff like the cave being used as a direct religious sort of property in Mason's life at the time, but it's a wholly natural thing, and yet on top of that they also hold I'll use paganist religious services in it, to go back to Luke's quote from the beginning of the show. So I think it seems that he is continuing to build this extension of an idea of natural deism existing within the land and within properties of the land, which is a big part of some deistic beliefs. The idea that you can still see evidence of God in the way that God created the clock, so to speak, before he stepped away from it and just let it run. Like his fingerprint is still there, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that gets to the heart of a lot of Native American beliefs as well, as far as the land and the inherent properties and medicine that it holds, and how that is an expression of the creator as well. So I think what we're kind of, I don't want to say stumbling on it, because I'm sure that plenty of other people have made these connections, but what seems to be continuing to occur is allusions back to that, and this is a good example of another one.
Just to explain myself a little bit, I did do some Googling, and the band I was thinking of is Paul Revere and the Raiders, which I've been aware of them since I was a kid, because my dad had one of their CDs. But they're an example of Fop rock that I think I've known about since I was like 10. So I didn't link it to the word Fop, but I was aware of that. Sorry that's kind of random.
No,
but
I can't believe it's been around for that long.
It's been around since, I think they started, I guess, like in the 50s. I think that they've been performing in those costumes that whole time.
Holy crap. I learn something every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a band that I'm familiar with, and they had some pretty big singles. I did not know they performed in costumes, though.
Yeah, neither did I.
The things I've learned from reading Thomas Pynchon books and going on Wikipedia deep dives.
So jumping back to tourmaline,
Yeah.
So I did a little bit of surface level research here on tourmaline myself, and it seems like it was actually used as a bit of a parlor trick to flame tourmaline, because it's slightly magnetic, and the combination of heat and magnetism would cause ash to, behave contrary to gravity, to put it briefly. Yeah, so it seems like tourmaline would have been used for these kinds of quasi-mystical purposes in that time period in real life. But the magnetism is kind of interesting. It seems like it's the gem quality ones that are most magnetic. Regardless, what it reminds me of, though, that in terms of actual inventions, is the quartz watch or quartz clock, where you pass an electric current through the quartz crystal, and the resonance it responds is pegged at a certain rhythm. And with all the talk of time in this book, it just seems way too significant to ignore that.
Yeah, that more than likely I can't imagine being accidental.
Will, I think you wanted to talk about the wigs that were on skulls, if I remember correctly, from the first recording that you guys did.
Oh, I forgot I brought that up. Give me a second to collect my thoughts.
Sure.
Just real quick, did y'all? I guess Kate hasn't read Against Today, but doesn't Blundell come back as a proper noun in a later pension book?
There's a one of the Gems of Chance is Miles Blundell.
Yeah, I believe it's spelled differently in
Okay.
Against Today. But anyway, what were you gonna say, Will?
Well, I think it's I think what I was thinking of when I mentioned the skulls, and to refresh listeners, what we're talking about is when Eliza kidnapped by the Jesuits. She's in the Viudas del Cristo. They shave her, and she goes looking for the wig room because she's, I guess, getting envious. And so she goes in and she looks around and she just stares at all these wigs for hours and hours, and finds the quality of the stands for the wigs impressive. And it's only at the end, when she's escorted out of the room and told off for being where she shouldn't be, it's only then that she realizes that these wig stands are actually skulls. And it just seems like the Wolf of Christ, or is that the Wolf of Jesus? Sorry, being so gung-ho, to put it politely, with regard to his definition of conversion. It seems like we might have there symbols of previous viudas, or just other indigenous people. Just have a very literal symbolism of bleached skulls, with the most poignant symbol, I guess, of aristocracy, the powdered white wig. To have all of these skulls, whether they're indigenous or kidnapped women or just random people.
Well, I was going to ask what we all thought of this incarnation of Mason's wife, or sort of a facsimile of his wife, if we had any thoughts on that, because I feel like that was one area we didn't talk too much about in the previous episode that you guys did without me.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that some. I don't have any necessarily super concrete thoughts about it. I did kind of, Mason is over the course of this book shown to be more amenable to kind of occult or supernatural stuff. I'm not saying that maybe Dixon isn't amenable to that, but Mason seems more focused on it. It seems to be a bigger part of his personality. I personally would link that to. I kind of linked it to Mason, kind of maybe losing it a little bit. I don't know. I did actually. I meant to look up if that was a type of, because it seems like a lot of stuff like that is has now been kind of filed under psychiatric conditions. That there's a technical name for stuff like that. You know, like seeing somebody and thinking that they're a dead person that you care about a lot. Seems like it would be, if that's if that's at all commonplace. Seems like it would be some type of, there'd be a name for it in psychology, psychiatry. Um, I did kind of initially view it as Mason, another aspect of Mason's craziness, although he does, I think, by the end of chapter 55, kind of go back on thinking that they're the same person, or that they're even similar at all. I think he says something about her hair being different, or something about, I can't remember right now. But personally, I did just kind of link it to how he is shown to be throughout the book, and how he is perhaps a bit crazy, um, even for a pension character.
I do think it's interesting that she's described at the very beginning of that section at the end of chapter 53. She's described as her eyelids never blinking, which, going back to the beginning of chapter 51, when Mason sleeps with his eyes open, I'm just seeing that now. I just thought that was an interesting kind of connection. I don't know if that has anything to do with each other, but it's just interesting that he was mentioned specifically sleeping with his eyes open, and then she's mentioned specifically as not ever blinking. But it does. I mean, she does. I don't know. I'm not sure where I am on that, because she talks about how, she specifically says that I'm not she, but a representation. This thing she will not style it death. So there's I get the sense that he's kind of trying to parse his understanding of what he is seeing, and trying to reconcile whether it's an actual manifestation of her, or if it's just him, as Luke said, kind of just slowly losing it.
I read it a couple of different ways at the same time. I think there's a little bit of I think there's just kind of a mocking of the entire trope of, a guy going up to somebody trying to pick them up by saying, "Hey, do I know you from XYZ?" And I think that's kind of how I read Eliza's interpretation of the events. And I think that it is primarily a matter not of necessarily Mason trying to figure out if it really is a reincarnation of Rebecca, because Erica is old enough. Erica, is that her name? Eliza is old enough to have to not be a reincarnation in any way. And then there are some belief systems in the world that basically have reincarnation be temporally agnostic, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's how he would think of it. I certainly don't think that's how he would think of it in terms of trying to derive a message from her appearance. I do think that he is much more trying to just come to terms with the idea that he's going to keep seeing her out of the corner of his eye. This is just a physical incarnation. This is a doppelganger that might be real, might not be real, because the thing is that, she's had every piece of hair shaved off her body. She's not had any liberty to control how she looks. And a recurring theme throughout all of Pynchon's books is, I think in Inherent Vice, it's phrased as change your hair, change your life.
Mm-hmm.
And in all of the other books, it's just a recurring theme of characters swapping into and out of disguises. And in this case, I think what we're seeing is she is, in a sense, a blank slate. For one, because she is a stranger to Mason, so he doesn't know anything about her. Secondly, visibly, she's wearing like simple deerskin tunic, essentially, and she has a shaved head. And so she's just kind of a pretty generic looking person, So maybe she does look a lot like Rebecca. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe it didn't really matter.
I do think it's interesting that Carrie Coke, interesting in a very crass and juvenile way, that Carrie Coke's and Mason's talk about this happens whenever we find out that Cherry Coke is taking a shit in the woods and he's just sitting there talking to Mason about his dead wife.
I don't know. That might be one of those things. Sorry, that might be one of those things that, a few years ago it was very trendy online to point out, hey, historically humans woke up in the middle of the night and they got up to business for about an hour and then they went back to bed. It doesn't matter how true that is. It reminds me a bit of just kind of that general idea that we truly might have just had weird habits in the past that we couldn't conceive of doing today, like chatting while you're squatting over a hole.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have barriers between our toilet stalls, so we wouldn't ever want to do that, but maybe they just chatted a while.
I could also, there's no way to prove this, but I could also see from a comedic angle Mason choosing to do it now because maybe Cherry Coke won't talk to him as long because he doesn't want to be engaged in a conversation while he's taking a shit. So it's just Mason trying to get less FaceTime with a man that he loathes. But
there's no way he'll talk to me now.
Well, that's definitely possible. But on the other hand, to flip it around entirely, we had this entire, I think it was 2 episodes ago now, this long stretch of chatting about Daffy's elixir and stuff. And actually, in this part, Daffy's elixir comes back up. Daffy's elixir is a laudanum, I think. Or might be getting it mixed up. But one of them is a laudanum and the other is an expectorant, a gastric stimulant. And, Cherry Coke is not going to be taking any laudanum to stop himself up from the random giardia he picks up along the road. And Mason, on the other hand, is probably happy to take plenty of laudanum. He's not into it as heavy as Dixon is, clearly. But, any laudanum is going to back you up a fair bit, is my understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, the Daffy's elixir is a laxative. I just looked it up.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's, that's important. You do need to be able to stop yourself up on this kind of a journey. Lewis and Clark, that was, if you read through their diaries, there's a whole lot of talk of how much laudanum they were drinking. Because you just need to stop yourself up sometimes. But Cherry Coke's not going to do that. So one of them might be spending an extra period of time over a hole for reasons of not being able to get stuff going, and the other vice versa.
Kate, what was your take on Jesus, why am I blanking on this now? Zhang and his whole mini arc within the last part of these chapters.
As far as like him turning into Zarpazo.
Yeah. I mean, specifically that, but he's an interesting character, I think, in general. But it only gets more interesting as the chapter progresses.
True. Yeah. I mean, I think as far as like the reasoning behind why he turns into Zarpazo, I think he kind of tells the reader that it's this concept of like you can get to know your enemy so well that you can become him or her, and to know your enemy is to have a better chance of survival. I think is really sort of just a sensationalized version of that kind of idea or that theme. I think that Zarpazo is, or Zhang rather, is an interesting foil to Zarpazo for the purposes of the comparison between Feng Shui and the Jesuit project of mapping the line. I think that sort of that's what his presence in the narrative is initially there for, and then Pynchon just extrapolates out from that as far as whatever his mind came up with. I think that it's there to kind of give an example of a couple of things. The idea that the Jesuits opposing Eastern philosophy or opposing something that is outside of their orthodoxy has very real consequences for people. I think that's the first thing that Pynchon is sort of bringing up or drawing from there in this comparison, and sort of the narrative that he draws over the couple of chapters. I think the second thing, with it being feng shui in direct opposition to this idea of like a more modernized drawing of straight lines or more civilized lines, gets to the whole naturalistic aspect of some of the stuff that we've been talking about, where this concept of drawing these lines, making these scars upon the earth, to actually use their scars upon the dragon, I think is the exact phrasing, has unforeseen consequences, which we've already seen in a couple of instances over the course of the book, with the split between the man and his wife when the thing goes directly through the house.
Mhm.
The person immediately going into an expansionist mindset once he sees that part of his farm is in a different territory. Like, we've seen examples of how there are unforeseen consequences of making these marks upon the earth. And ultimately for the Mason and Dixon line, the unforeseen consequence and the effect that it has on the natural world is that it's eventually going to be used as the dividing line for the Civil War, which leads to not just a massive amount of death, but a massive amount of devastation upon the actual land through the battles that are going to take place. So I think it's his presence in the narrative is to provide that perspective and that idea that pushing for modernization or for certain philosophies that come out of a Western mindset or from a place that is inherently corrupt, like the Jesuits as they're presented in this book, like an obscenely heretical organization by their own standards of religion, will potentially lead to unforeseen consequences that won't come around for 100 years. That's kind of the overall vibe of that I pick up as far as why he's in the narrative and what he's used to explore thematically.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I don't know. I think I disagree.
You're gonna have to back that up.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd love to hear more.
I just think you're all wrong. Just completely incorrect.
Fair enough.
We're too positive. It's a love box here.
The dead silence that we all subscribe to the minute that Will went, I think you're wrong, says, I think, more about this podcast than anything could have.
No, I do pretty much agree. But it's boring to say that.
Speaking of Zhang, in chapter 55, I do think it's really interesting that he has done feng shui jobs. Everything he says at the beginning of the chapter is really interesting, some of which I talked about last week, or the last episode. But the fact that he's done feng shui jobs on 3 different continents and some of the examples that are given are pretty interesting. I did find it. I think it's not in his. It's just Chercoke's the one speaking during this part, but I did think that Chercoke's evoking tent revivals is kind of generally how many churches there are in America and the widespread nature of Christianity in America was really interesting. I would be interested to see. I associate tent revivals more with the 1800s and especially the late 1800s.
Yeah.
I don't associate them with the 1700s as much. I get that we're kind of moving into the later part of the 1700s. But I do think it's interesting that it's hundreds and then thousands, which does seem to kind of evoke mega churches as well as tent revivals.
And I don't remember what episode number it was, but that was something that I had brought up when Pynchon seems to make a deliberate connection between like evolving times having to do with music and religion, and kind of drawing a comparison to the 1960s with the 1760s. And I talked about tent revivals in that episode too. So I definitely think that you're on to something that he has already brought up earlier in the book as well. So it's forming into a pattern if it's something that you're picking up on here too. I think one of the other interesting religious aspects within these chapters, and going back to chapter 53 for a minute, is Zarpazo's sermon that he gives at the end of chapter 53 in particular. It ties really well into the sermon that leads up with the beginning of chapter 53, but it also inherently reminded me of the Grand Inquisitor section of the Brothers Karamazov, as far as what Zarpazo is actually illustrating to his audience. If I go back and read it here, it carries the mark of the adversary. It is too easy, not earned. Too little of the load is borne by the practitioner, too much by some force invisible, and the unknown price it must extract. What do you imagine those to be, that must ever remain so unreferred and unreferable to Jesus Christ? And as his soldiers, how can we ever permit that? 'Twas a simpler time, children, where many grew quite exercised indeed over questions of doctrine. There is deep, throat-snarling hatred, for example, as the wolf of Jesus instructs them. The Christless must understand that their lives are to be spent in servitude, if not to us, then to Christians even less godly, the kings, the enterprisers, the adventurers chartered and practical. What of those that we may convert? The priest makes a dismissive gesture, his knuckles flashing pale in the candlelight. Conversion is no guarantee of a Christly life. Jews are converted, savages. English wives, Chinese, what matter? Once converted, all then revert. Each one at the end of the day is found somewhere, often out in the open, among ancient stones, repeating without true faith the same vile rituals. Where is he? Where are his forgiveness, his miracles? He is upon his knees in apparent consultation. The students after a while begin to whisper together, and soon the place is chattier than a coffee house. The Spanish visitor continues apart. So there's obviously further follow-up on details from Cherry Coke's sermon at the beginning of the chapter. There's also this idea of like naturalistic elements and paganism coming out of the land that one comes in that he brings up too. But that middle section where he talks about how there's no way to live a Christly life, and so therefore all that matters is the church and direct obeisance to the church's doctrine and service to the church, and that is the only thing that is going to be even possible, and that the church has supplanted Christ. That is very similar to the words that the Grand Inquisitor says to Christ in the Brothers Karamazov. So that was another sort of piece of classic literature, kind of going back to the Don Quixote reference from earlier, that I find also bears influence on these chapters too.
I think the worst part of Pynchon's villains, and the Wolf of Jesus is definitely one of his villains, is really the fact that you can't roll your eyes at them. In most other novels, even historical ones, you can at least step back and say, yeah, but this is fiction. Mm-hmm. And yes, were the Jesuits as self-awarely evil as the Wolf of Jesus is in this book? Almost certainly not.
Right.
But at the same time, they did essentially live by the code that he's outlining in this chapter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is hard to, therefore, separate, when reading these chapters, separate what the symbolic meaning in the book, or historically, what's the social criticism, when it is in some way just a description of what was happening in a way that is accessible to most people who aren't aware.
Right, which gets more or less to the same ideas that Dostoevsky was trying to espouse with this chapter. Like, I don't think the Inquisition were self-awaredly evil either. I don't think they were mustache twirling. Maybe they were closer to it than the Jesuits were, but I certainly think the same thing would apply there, where he is using a sort of fictional character to talk about the implications of real life events that are ongoing.
Definitely. Did anybody take note of any significance of the discussion of desire?
What page is it on?
Yeah, what?
It's across 53 and 54. Right at the beginning of 54 is a pretty apparent example, talking about the Chinese food. You'll love it, cried Blondel. The food they eat there is delicious beyond belief. Shrimps with hot chilies and peanuts, sliced chicken and garlic and black bean sauce, cold sesame noodles, sweet biscuits with messages folded inside upon paper you can eat. Ah, making myself hungry just thinking about it. The wicked French nuns all took a coordinated dance step
The Chinese
together,
food?
turned and shook their fingers. Basest form of desire, Blondel. Even to speak of it suggests a failure of self-restraint I am all but obliged to report.
I didn't make any specific notes on that, but I'm in rereading it.
I think I was too blindsided by the anachronistic use of fortune cookies.
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
track that.
Yeah.
Not only
of
anachronistic,
anything else.
but also not Chinese.
Yeah.
It's just that it comes up earlier, and it seems like it's a major part of Eliza's lesson to be taught to her by the widows of Christ. You know, they berate her for thinking about the tattoos too sensuously. Just comes up a few too many times for me to not try to make something out of it.
I mean, we did get into this last week, the yin and yang and different stuff. I do think it's interesting that whenever the Native Americans kidnap her, they aren't shown to be sexually interested in her or really interested in her very much at all.
Mhm.
And obviously, the relationship and the possibility of romance between Jang and Eliza is addressed. Some which I don't necessarily have any concrete thoughts on what that means overall, but
Well, we kind of touched on that last time. I think Will brought that up. That dynamic, at least.
yeah.
I mean, it could also have something to do with like borrowing of cultures through the process of colonial and imperialistic projects, and how you are oftentimes, especially from a religious perspective, going there to kind of like lift up the more savage peoples to a more honest way of living by your own perspective, or a more enlightened way of living. But so often you end up taking aspects from those cultures anyway and holding on to them, when in reality, if those cultures had nothing redeemable in them, then you would have no reason to hold on to their food or their music or anything like that. I mean, the national dish of England is chicken tikka masala.
Mhm.
And so you have this religious order that is trying to kind of bring enlightenment to peoples that it inherently thinks are lesser than they are, but there is this intense desire for their food and their culture, which is inherently bad, because it's something that they shouldn't be giving themselves over to, because they're supposed to be in opposition to it. And of course, there are aspects of the Bible about like gluttony or covetousness in general that could be applied there, but he could be mentioning something about cultural theft as well.
That would make sense, or even to some extent, be asserting an ulterior motive or something.
Right.
To the religious side of things.
Especially something like a fortune cookie, which, if you're putting any stock in as a highly religious individual, is comedic in this instance, but could be extrapolated to a larger problem.
Wait, you're saying that fortune cookies are not reliable?
I don't think so.
My whole life is a lie now.
Yeah, I know.
I've done everything that they've told me.
I'll have to stop collecting everything in sets of 27, 33, and 19.
Those are special numbers.
They wouldn't put them on there if they weren't.
It's a real letdown. Like you said, what you learn from reading Pynchon.
Right.
The only thing that I have is just to continue my little investigation of the letter from Nath to his friend that I've been going back to the last 2 times. As I said in our group chat, it did occur to me that that Nate's name and the shortening of Nate's name in this book could be a possible clue about the relationship between Richard Farina and Thomas Pynchon, and it's possible how that might have influenced or been at least part of the impetus for Pynchon to write this book. I guess to kind of specify what really made me think of that originally was the line in that letter, which I don't have it up right now, but it's something about like wanting to fly with him, fly with his friend, like on flying pigs or something. And I do remember I'd sent a very similar sentence that referenced Adventure Time and Jake and Finn from Adventure Time to a friend who was in California whenever I was in Abilene in college. And, you know, California seems very exotic and exciting whenever you live in Abilene, Texas. So that just kind of reminded me of that. And then, as I was saying, you know, like the Nate, you know, I have some friends named Nathan. I grew up with a Nathan, and his name, whenever you shorten it, is always Nate. Which, and I can't really think of a reason why, besides a perhaps historical basis for this, which I kind of doubt that there is one. But I don't see why you would shorten Nathaniel to Nath unless it was at least a possible reference to Richard Farina, because you wouldn't, whenever you would shorten the name Richard, you would shorten it to Rich and not, which has the H sound, not Rick usually. I mean, I haven't actually ever really been close to a Richard or had a nickname for anyone named Richard. So I'm sure that there may be exceptions to this rule, but yeah, I mean, that's just kind of my little pet theory that is a perhaps kind of indirect clue as to Nath and his role in this book and who inspired Nath and a lot of different stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whole line of like questioning and conversation that you guys had in your episode last week is something that I would have never thought of, certainly until you got into it. And I think there is definitely a real basis for that probably having some foundation in reality, especially with, I don't remember who had said it, but especially with how warm this book generally is compared to his other work and how much about male friendship it is. Mm-hmm. I can absolutely see a basis for that, certainly. And I don't think that that's been published in any journals or literary criticism that I've noticed. So there could be an opportunity for you to write something there, Luke.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It had occurred to me that this was perhaps at least somewhat original. So, which I'm excited about. Pat myself on the back, I guess.
I can say I do know a few Richards. I'm one of them. It's actually my first name.
Whoa.
Yeah,
damn.
I know.
Cody is short for Richard?
It's, well, yeah. I mean, you have to trace it back a ways. It's a long family history thing. No, my uncle, I actually have an Uncle Rick who is on my mom's side. But on my dad's side of the family, up until I ruined it with my son, all the firstborn sons in the family were named Richard. However, I was terrorized as a child and constantly called Dick. So I abandoned using that name pretty quickly. So it never, I honestly, like, more of the Richards I know have gone by Rick than Rich. So it's interesting because I never really fully understood the K. It makes more sense to be Rich, but you know, it's neither here nor there, really.
That's interesting. A little Cody factoid.
Yeah, and now you all know my dark secret about my name.
Government name.
Yeah.
So I don't say this at all to contradict your theory, Luke, because I think it makes a whole lot of sense. But I do think it's notable that he is Nate McLean, or Nath McLean, and it's a Scottish name, and a lot of the Scottish people who came to North America this early on were Ulster Scots who were being pushed out of Ireland, and the people from Ireland would have pronounced it Nathe as Nate, and they wouldn't have thought to get rid of the H when they were writing it, I guess.
Yeah, I did. I have seen some stuff, and I took a class on linguistics in college and stuff. I did very poorly in that class, but I do know that there's different stuff with the. I think from taking a Shakespeare class, this came up that the th when you would write th in English of at least the Shakespeare's time, it would be pronounced like t instead of th, even if it was spelled without the, even if it was spelled with the h. I think I learned that because of the. I think I remember that because of the double meaning of much ado about nothing, and then it would have been pronounced much ado about noting. And there's supposedly, I remember my teacher went on a long. I had a very good Shakespeare teacher. He went on a long diatribe about the pun of that of noting, and how I can't remember. I don't remember that play very well, but it's something to do with there being so many puns in the play and stuff about writing in the play, maybe. But yeah, I actually didn't think about that until you brought it up, though.
See, I thought you were going to say that you learned about it from Othello.
Oh yeah, that's another one. I don't. Yeah, I don't remember him talking about that one as much. I really enjoy. I think this is completely random, but Much Ado About Nothing was probably my favorite Shakespeare play that we learned about that semester.
That's my favorite one too.
I just wanted to say, was it you, Cody, or was it you, Luke, who said that Zhuja?
Oh, the Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Yeah,
That was me, yeah.
Right after we stopped recording last week, I thought, or I realized her name is Zhuja Jabo. So yeah.
Well, we got what would have been Kate's quote for the last episode. I am curious to know what your selection for funny part and most pinch on part would have been or would be.
Oh God, I mean, I think that the whole. I guess it doesn't necessarily have to do with something that's directly on the text, but my most pinch on part would be the invitation to play around in the sandbox of what the hell the interplay between the Ghastly Fop and Mason and Dixon and Cherry Coke are. I think that just creating that space and the way he goes about doing it, and the discussion that it prompts in readers would definitely be my most pinch on part of the chapter. I think as far as funny part, that one's harder because this is not a very funny set of chapters, but probably the fact that he chooses to go to Cherry Coke when he's taking a shit to have this massive conversation about his dead wife and reveal the fact that he may be having visions of her, regularly. That just seems like such an insane venue to do that for. I would say that would be a big one. And beyond that, just the inherent absurdity of this Chinese man morphing himself into a Spanish man and donning the clothes of a Jesuit, apparently bishop, given the fact that it has purple piping on the actual vestments. And then the fact that he's kind of monologuing to no one in particular the entire time he's doing that, where he's just constantly talking. And
it felt like a WWE thing. Like
yeah,
it just
exactly.
felt like a wrestling bit.
Yeah, your guys' analog to that is very on the nose. But I could also see it being played for comedic effect in a movie adaptation where he's just kind of endlessly talking like an insane person in the middle of a rant, and everyone around him is like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah.
Just the imagery of that, I would say, is definitely another funny part for me. But beyond that, I think I don't really have any other specific ones that you guys didn't already cover.
Do you think whenever I listen to this for this episode, I didn't necessarily find them very funny, but I did notice how many boner jokes there are in this section, which there are, I think, at least 3 or 4, kind of back to back to back. Which again, I don't really find them they weren't like laugh out loud funny, but it just always amuses me that Pynchon, who I think would have been in his 40s, 50s, and 60s when he was writing this, is still including boner jokes in his books.
I mean, he's got yo mama jokes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
He has a very broad selection of humor.
High magic of low puns theory.
That's right. Well, we did get another email from Brett, and if I think I put it up in our group chat. If anybody wants to read that,
I can take it if you want.
Yeah.
Hey all, I really enjoyed listening to the discussion surrounding this wild section. Here's a few minor things, most of it corroborating your thoughts. Lady Barnard. My notes refer to Elizabeth Vane. I'm not sure why the text lists 1742 as her death date, but the rest of the details, including the black coach and 6 and red hot knitting needles, very closely match what's listed in the text, and they're all a part of Durham folklore. You're right that the real Elizabeth Vane died in 1725, so 1742 is either just a rare Pynchon error, an error made by the characters in the book, or else it's possible Pynchon was using a source listing the wrong death date. Yes, the Jesuits were on the outs much of the world during the late 1750s and into the 1770s. The one exception to this was the Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa, though even she reversed course in the late 1760s. Zhang and Dixon allude to this in their episode 55 conversation. I very much agree with the comparison of this section with an Escher drawing. It's pretty much impossible to untangle all the layers regarding how the fop relates to the main text. The wild theory I have is that Cherry Coke wrote a fop parody, and maybe that's what Ethelmer and Bray are reading. Or maybe it's as simple as Cherry Coke includes the references to Eliza Fields as a way of telling Ethelmer and Bray he knows what they've been up to. Oh, that's an interesting theory, Brett. Or as Peter Schmidt writes in his essay about this section, linked in a previous email, it could be that it's part of Pynchon paying tribute to all forms of 18th century writing, from captivity narratives to pornography. For me, the section really starts to get into the counterforce stuff that exists in Mason and Dixon. That dynamic is most clearly present in Gravity's Rainbow, but it's really nuanced here. Zarpazo, the Rome Rimini mapping project featuring Dixon's friend Lemaire, and all the other attempts to determine the size and shape of the Earth that get mentioned in this section, like La Condamine and Pierre Bouger, represent the Enlightenment and its desire for order and control. Zhang is the counterforce, proposing a more holistic way of thinking about things. He's certainly exoticized in a way like a character like Cherry Coke would exoticize the East, but he's also a little bit mad, perhaps like Hellegast is mad, maybe even in a holy way. But I think we're meant to take his critique seriously. Even so, it isn't as simple as Zhang good and Zarpazo bad. Like yin and yang, force and counterforce are the twin dynamics of history, and they often result in violent upheavals like the Revolution. For Eliza Fields, she's caught between the two worlds, trying to find solace in between. I find her to be relatable in this aspect, caught up in historical forces she can't control and trying to find a home more meaningful than the one she was taken from. See her dream about the bridge with two sides. This relates to Maxwell's Demon in Lot 49 and the Haunt House and the Street in V. Worth noting, Eliza Fields is from Conestoga, noted for its wagons. Mason and Rebecca grew up near the Cotswolds, also noted for its wagons. I think Eliza is meant to be a double of Rebecca in certain ways, and there are many layers to that comparison. Finally, the Cobra Brain Pearl. In Hinduism and Buddhism, Vasuki is a serpent king coiled around the neck of Shiva. He's got a gem called a Nagamani in his forehead. I think that ties into your wonderful discussion of religion in these sections. So much to cover and tease out in these sections. Great work so far. Excited for next week. Yeah, I thank you as always for your email, Brett. I think too your drawing of force and counterforce and yin and yang, and how that builds into this idea that it isn't as simple as Zhang good, Zarpazo bad, makes sense when you extrapolate out the fact that there is some of the white in the black and some of the black in the white of the yin and yang. These two things share characteristics with one another inherently, and that certainly gets to the things that you're discussing there. I also think that the point about the wagons building on this double of Rebecca makes perfect sense with what Cherry Coke tells Mason in their conversation. The idea that she is somewhat of a resurrection, but without the soul. There are similarities there, but the person that Mason is actually in love with is not.
Well, thank you, Brett, as always. And we will look forward to your notes on everything we've discussed here, if there are any. And of course, any listeners who want to send in questions, comments, clarifications, anything that that they wanted to have us discuss on here, we would appreciate any of it. We are slowly getting our episodes up on YouTube. That is a process that I've been working on, and all of our Lot 49 episodes are up there. I'm working on getting Mason and Dixon up. I got the first few up there, so I'll keep putting those up throughout the week for anyone who is prefers to have it on YouTube. It's still just the audio. We don't have any video to accompany it, so don't expect anything different than what you're getting here, other than a nice picture of the cover of the book that we're discussing. But yeah, all our links to our social media are in the show notes. And as always, we thank you all so much for listening and joining us on our exploration of this fantastic book. And we will see you all next week.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
I can't get over this picture of this fucking band.
It's absurd. Absurd.
I really
Go
on,
ahead,
Kate.
Luke.
No, you got it.
I was just gonna say I had to mute myself for a minute there because I couldn't stop laughing at the way that Will said Cody is short for Richard in a sarcastic way that I kept holding back laughter for like 10 minutes afterwards. Then I eventually had to mute myself to just let that out because that caught me so off guard.
You never know what nicknames are for.
This is true.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that I pulled out that Paul Revere and the Raiders thing because it brought me back like very viscerally to being in my dad's car and like I think like probably like around the year 2000 and like seeing a CD with them on the cover and being all curious and sticking it in the CD player. I had like a very vivid like memory come back to me that I hadn't remembered in years.
Can't say I've ever heard any of. I mean, I've heard some of the. I definitely haven't heard this band that's in the picture, but I'm gonna listen to it tomorrow. That's for sure.
You mean Jethro Tull?
No, not Jethro Tull. The whatever this. I can't remember the name of this band now. The one in the picture. Is it the Upper Crust? Is that what they're called?
They're called the Upper Crust.
Yeah, they
That's super
absolutely
funny.
are.
Oh, the guy on the right
God.
has like leopard skin pants. I
He
think.
sure does. The dude playing guitar looks like Andy Samberg. I can't unsee it.
Oh, the one in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a similarity there. Yeah.
Their major music influence is Bon Scott era AC/DC, along with Kiss and
What?
Spinal Tap.
The Kiss thing at least makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're from
and the Spinal
Boston.
Tap part makes sense too. But Jesus Christ, they've been on Conan and Craig Ferguson. They were on Guitar Hero.
This isn't even an old band.
No, they've been around since '95.
Why does this photo look like it's from the 70s then?
These guys'
film
names:
grain.
Lord Bendover, the Duke Distortion, Jackie Kickasses.
Their album names, Let Them Eat Rock. Once
Kick asses. Is that a Jaggy O?
once
I
more
guess.
into the breaches.
I love these guys already. There's a documentary about them. Oh, I have plans for tomorrow.
What is their website like?
Oh man, this is something else.
This looks like it was made in
No
2010 and it was never updated.
The guy that directed the documentary is the same guy that did the movie Idle Hands.
Oh, that's crazy. Guys, did you know that we could see the Upper Crust with Super Suckers Sunday, July 30th, 2017 at the Beachland Ballroom in Cleveland, Ohio?
You just missed it.
Speaking of Cleveland, have y'all ever seen Stranger Than Paradise? The Jim Jarmusch
the Jim
movie?
Jarmusch film?
Yeah.
I have not.
I just watched it for the first time like a week or two ago, and it kept on reminding me of the 30 Rock episode where Tina Fey and what's his name, the fucking Ted Lasso guy like he wants her to move to Cleveland, and like they moved it, like she goes to Cleveland and like is like trying to act all like excited about, and there's all this like jokes about how much Cleveland and Ohio suck, which
Hey, now I think you're misremembering. The joke of that is that cynical coastal elites would assume that the joke is that Ohio sucks, and that in reality we all would like to move to Cleveland. Thank you very much. That's one of my favorite jokes ever. The Cleveland thing running throughout 30 Rock.
yeah, 30 Rock has some top level humor.
Mhm.
I'm not like a major fan of it, but I do. There's some of the funniest things I've ever seen around 30 Rock.
It was a good show.
Yeah.
Have you seen any other Jim Jarmusch films, Luke?
I actually was looking the other day. I did watch his first movie because I bought a Criterion Collection thing of Stranger Than Paradise. So I did watch his first movie, which is part of the DVD. And then I have seen, I think I saw Patterson, which I want to say I might have been in creative writing grad school for poetry when that came out. And then I saw the zombie movie, but so I've seen his like first two movies and his last two movies, but none in the middle at all.
I would definitely. Down by Law is fantastic, and everyone in that, like Tom Waits especially, is absolutely wonderful in that movie. Mystery Train was really good. Coffee and Cigarettes. I think Kate and I talked about that a while back on one of the episodes. That was a really good. That more is like a series of vignettes, but it's really, really cool because he filmed it over like a 30-year period. Dead Man is a really cool movie with an amazing score that Neil Young did. That I need to watch again because I hadn't thought about it in a while. But holy shit, that was a cool movie. And Broken Flowers was good. If you liked Bill Murray in Lost in Translation, Broken Flowers was good too.
Okay, I do like Lost in Translation a fair amount. Especially because I kind of go through phases of being really, really into My Bloody Valentine, which I know you talked about in a recent episode.
One of my favorite bands.
Yeah, or maybe it was when we were supposed to record or something. Yeah, I go through phases of listening to them a lot and shoegaze in general a lot, and then I like forget that they exist for a year or two, and then I go back to it.
But yeah, I mean, definitely Down by Law. Check that one out if you liked, if you like Stranger Than Paradise. God, I want to watch Down by Law and I want to listen to Tom Waits.
Both are good options. I went to the record store today before I had to go to work, Cody, and I managed to find an original pressing of On the Beach today.
Oh, I haven't. The one I have framed in my living room is original pressing.
Yeah,
it was one of the ones I could not sell. That's
understandable. And like they had it apparently for a couple of days, and I was blown away that nobody had already come in and gotten it because they put it on their Instagram. It was
never on CD for a long time, and so it was kind of like an obscure album of his. So when I found it, it was like $2 at Half Price Books.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the CD came out, the vinyl had kind of a resurgence in popularity, and I never would see it again anytime I ever went into a record store. So it's a hard one to find nowadays.
Yeah, this is definitely the first time I've seen an original pressing. I've seen the reissues a bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that, and then I also, speaking of Pinch On, got a Country Joe and the Fish record as well, which is what Shasta Faye Hepworth used to wear shirts for all the time.
That was one of the band names that I 100% just assumed was made up.
Nope, they're a really great psychedelic rock band from the late 60s.
They're really cool.
To know.
They played at Woodstock. But I can definitely see why you'd hear that and be like, that can't be real.
Well, I mean, in that book especially, all the different fake band names.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most Pinchonian band name that isn't in a Pinch-On book is probably the String Cheese Incident. I feel like that feels like something that should be in a Pinch-On book.
Toad the Wet Sprocket would get a vote, but that was directly taken from Monty Python, which is Pinch-On-esque in itself. So
yeah, true.
Speaking of Inherent Vice, I recently resubscribed to the Death Is Just Around the Corner Patreon account, and he does like a 2 hour long episode about the book and movie Inherent Vice that came out I think 2 weeks ago, which it was a really fun listen.
Might have to check that out. Oh, and that reminds me, I have to thank you, Luke. I started listening to Super Context. That's a very good show.
Ooh, that
It
show's
is.
great.
They have some really interesting episodes. Generally, I've really enjoyed that show. It was somewhat frustrating that I think it was the same guy, like for their Infinite Jest and then their Gravity's Rainbow episodes. Only one of them had read it. And then it seemed kind of unclear because at the beginning of the episode they talk about that, and then the guy kind of seems to try to act like he has read it or something. I was a little bit confused by that whole thing, but yeah, that's one of my favorite podcasts that I've come across.
Check it out. I haven't heard of it.
Great.
The only one on literature that I've listened to, well, there were a couple, but the one I listened to more recently was Pale Fire. And I could totally see how one of those hosts' perspectives on art in general might not be conducive to appreciating Finchon enough to read Gravity's Rainbow.
Yeah, their episode on Annihilation is probably my favorite episode of theirs, and it does provide. So I know it's called Super Context, but it does provide some really really interesting context to that book and to the movie as well.
Yeah, that is a pretty good episode of theirs. But I agree with you on the David Foster Wallace Infinite Jest one. I don't remember liking, and I think it was for the same reason you're talking about, where just only one of them read the book, and it was a guy who was like a really big fan of David Foster Wallace a long time ago and isn't anymore. So he had a skewed opinion on it when they recorded it. And then, if I remember correctly, the Gravity's Rainbow one, like, to Will's point, one of them read it and just hated the entire experience, and the other one met with a literature professor who went through the book with him chapter by chapter, and he talked about it being like the most life-changing experience he ever had reading a book, but then barely talked about his experience with that literature professor for the entire episode, which was disappointing. But
yeah,
like every other episode that they've done on literature, I've really loved.
I'll have to check that out because I have not heard of this podcast, but I'm going through their episodes list and there's a lot of cool stuff in here.
Well, it was really funny how I think probably the guy who didn't read Gravity's Rainbow, when they were talking about Pale Fire, just basically got actively offended at the insinuation that it was a postmodern text. Like that, I spend probably too much time thinking about stupid terms like modernism and postmodernism, but
Right.
I can't imagine caring that much.
It is weird.
Been listening to too much Jordan Peterson.
I can't remember. There was some book I read recently where I was looking through some reviews of it on Goodreads, or maybe it came up on Bad Reads, the subreddit. But everyone was focusing on like how postmodern it was and how like or maybe it was Crying About 49, where people were talking about how like they'll never read it was a podcast actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was a podcast on Spotify that I can't remember what the name of it is. But they had read Crying About 49, and like it seemed like half the time, like half the sentences in the show mentioned the word postmodern in a negative sense. It's just kind of weird how people get so focused on that term as a seemingly like an insult or a slur.
I love how many people that I've met, I've had this exact same conversation with, where they go on a rant about postmodernism, and the thing they're complaining about postmodernism not accounting for is the fundamental, concept of postmodern philosophy. Or it's just like, oh, they're not taking into account perspectivism.
It really seems like in the modern era, the amount of people who yell about postmodernism for one reason or another have really all turned into people basically saying, I don't know what pornography is, but I know what it is. I know what it looks like when I see it. Except they all happen to have different degrees of blindfolds on. like none of them actually have the ability to tell what they're talking about.
Yeah, I'm gonna blame Jordan Peterson. I think that's a good
think,
one.
I think
That's fair.
entirely,
Blame him for just about anything.
Yeah, entirely reasonable person to blame for that. Because like there are some valid critiques to make of postmodernism. David Foster Wallace made them in the 90s, but none of those are substantive to what people now are yelling about at all.
What you're saying that the problem of postmodernism is not the problem of the lack of God in everyday life?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I do think that it does have to do with neo crypto Marxism, though. Yeah, absolutely. And all of the people at the Frankfurt School that just got together and were like, "How can we just just fundamentally fuck up the world?" That was a real conversation that happened between a bunch of mostly Jewish people.
The recent, like, I don't know what happened. I missed something. Usually I don't miss these kinds of things. What happened recently that put the Frankfurt School into the alt-right's language?
That's your old boy JP, Jordan Peterson.
He do that?
Yep.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Because it just popped out of nowhere from my perspective. Like, JBP had been doing his thing for years, and then, a couple of months ago I see a bunch of people just shitting on the Frankfurt School.
Yep. Yeah, he started blasting the Frankfurt School years ago when he was first coming to the forefront. And yeah, it that's now turned into like this Bohemian Grove-esque boogeyman that people keep bringing up. Where, yeah, it's as if a bunch of, again, mostly Jewish, according to the people who adhere to this theory, people got together, suspiciously so, and all talked about, what can we do to really just kill Enlightenment philosophy? Let's come up with postmodernism. So come up with a whole cloth right here.
Adorno is the Antichrist.
I'm sure Jordan Peterson probably believes that.
We all know it.
Either that or he thinks that the Antichrist is a trans woman somewhere. That could also be the case.
If he doesn't, give him a week, and he will.
Yeah.
I highly doubt that Peterson has actually read any Adorno either.
Oh, there's no way.
Yeah.
None of the people who are up in arms about any of this have read any of it. That's the whole, that's one of the things that my wife has been doing as a librarian whenever people are bringing up the whole, like, we want to ban this book, is saying, have you actually read this book? Like, tell me what in this book, point specifically to the part in this book that you are protesting, and then we can have a conversation about it. And every single time, there is not a specific thing. It's just the book. None of them have read it. It's just it's a catch-all deflection of, we don't want to talk about the real problems that are going on. We have to divert it, and it's books. It's always books.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe the state of perpetual moral panics that pop culture has devolved into. It's insane.
It's exhausting.
Really is.
It's like the Republicans and the broadly conservative elements of this country, which I think it started with, and now it's just kind of innervated into the entirety of the culture. We're just like, well, we can't win on policy, so let's just make everyone fucking panicked all the time, just about everything. Yep. And then that worked really well for them. So then the Democrats were like, well, maybe we can make people panicked about the other stuff and about the Republicans and how they panic about everything. And now that's just what all culture is. It's just people freaking out about stuff for a weekend and then moving on to something else for the next 3 days. And on and on and on and on.
It is frustrating how the role that outrage plays in modern life, especially in America.
Yeah. I just can't. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. Like, there's some people who live down the street from us who their whole yard is just full of this, like, hyper aggressive, everything is an outrage. Everything is awful and trying to destroy the country and blah, blah, blah. And we were just saying to each other, like, how it must suck to be that angry all the damn time.
Right.
Like to just be that mad about
Life
everything.
shortening.
Like I think it was the end of American History X when I can't remember the main character's name. He was talking about how hate is like baggage and you're just carrying that weight around all the time, and letting go of it is just a cathartic experience.
Yeah.
Sounds
Nation
like
as
bullshit.
a whole. You prefer the I'll keep all my thoughts and feelings right here and then one day I'll die method of approach, Will?
Well, I think we should really foster hate, and we should strive to constantly unload it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just an endless trickle of fury.
So a world where the highway is the most deadly aspect of society.
I mean, historically, that's the way it worked, so why not?
Right.
Yeah.
But more intentionally.
Well, look, intent has never been the human race's strong suit.
We're gonna go on the highway, and this is where we're gonna let our rage out into the world.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, you look. It sounds like you're trying to make a joke, but no, yeah, exactly.
I do commute to work on the highway every day. Maybe I'm just pulling on my own experience.
I live in Texas, so everything is the highway. So
Yeah,
It was annoying living in San Marcos and how dominated my life was by I-35.
I fucking hate I-35 so
Oh,
much.
dude, it's
really
like
do.
it's the worst. Like it's the worst highway I've ever driven on. Like I have an endless amount of stories of like cars being stopped in the middle of the highway.
Yeah.
Like like
Oh, yeah.
in like at rush hour, but also at like 3 a.m. with their lights off in downtown Austin. You're going like 60, and suddenly you have to swerve and dude, it's the worst, man. Like
I take a back road up to Austin. I usually go up 281. And then when we've gone to Dallas a couple times in the last couple of years, and I specifically did not want to drive. So one time we took the train, which was actually awesome. And then the other time we took a back highway essentially up there, and it took like a couple extra hours, but goddamn it was worth it. I didn't have to deal with I-35.
I've almost died probably 3 or 4 times on I-35 over the
Oh,
last
for sure.
like 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible.
So it sounds like what you're saying is my dream has been achieved.
Yeah, just take a trip out by 35. Start in San Antonio and just go north, and you'll get it. It's fucking terrible.
See, the problem is we can't have it localized to Texas. We need an I-35 everywhere in order for
It runs all the way up to Canada.
Yeah, but that's only a few states. We need an
That's
all
true.
50 in order to really bring to fore the world would like to bring about.
I've
We
heard
should get
about
on this.
there's a thing where like I think it was like one of the Texas legislators like had a dream about a superhighway going through Texas, and like tried to like make it happen where it's like the highways in Houston where it's like like 8 lanes on each side and like all this stuff. Which, dude, like I don't know, the amount of drugs that would come up from Mexico like on that highway would be like ridiculous, because there's already a bunch on 35 anyway. But like
So
Texan legislators.
I had to verify. I have driven on I-35 East twice. Yeah, no, it sucks. It's terrible.
It's garbage. It seems to really amplify at the point where South Austin kind of starts. There's like this bubble that exists on 35 that I can't explain, but I have never experienced good traffic. I'm thinking about this now. I did almost die the last time I was on 35 and had a near-death experience. A goddamn power line fell literally 2 seconds
my
after we crossed under it. We were going up to Dallas for a concert, and no joke, like we crossed over this, we passed a power line, and immediately after we passed it, it sparked and fell right into the highway.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
The only time that I've ever quote enjoyed end quote being on I-35 was during the pandemic.
I bet it was nice. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because you'd see people driving like 80 to 90 on the highway, passing a cop. Cop gives no fucks.
Yep.
Like
That sounds
not.
about right.
That was really the only issues, people going ridiculous speeds. But like I could make it from San Marcos to downtown San Antonio in like 35, 40 minutes without really trying.
Well,
Usually that takes at least about an hour.
With
Yeah,
no
that
one
must
else
be
on
nice.
the road, the fact that there are no lines painted or there's no signage, that issue is gone.
The
Yeah.
Autobahn.
Yeah.
I'm not joking, by the way, Kate.
No, I know you're not.
There's no street lines. It's a strange choice on like a 6-lane highway.
I'm still just trying to get over the inherent absurdity of Luke's statement of a Texas legislator woke up one day from a dream of an 8-lane superhighway.
Dude, that is Texas for you though. Like that is
It
Texas.
really is.
It's the most Texas thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Like the fact that it was a dream, the fact he's like a mega Christian dude, like I'm sure he thought it like came from God, Like
Just
dude, I don't
Oh shit! It was Rick Perry. I'm reading about it right now.
Beautiful.
I didn't realize it was
It was-
goddamn Rick Perry.
It was that
Good old
dickhead,
Ricky
Rick Perry.
P.
That makes so much fucking sense. I
Oh,
hate
that's
that guy.
even better. Of course,
It
that's what
consi-
Rick Perry's dreaming about.
The Trans-Texas Corridor was first proposed by Texas Governor Rick Perry in 2002. It consisted of a 1,200-foot wide highway that also carried utilities such as electricity, petroleum, and water, as well as railway track and fiber optic cables. If that's not a fucking Republican fever dream, I don't know what is.
It's
Well,
like the most cyberpunk thing I've heard that has come out of Texas.
Well, it's incredibly Republican because of the 8-lane highway.
Yeah.
But the whole concept of it is kind of the encapsulation of late 20th century U.S. politics.
It's let's build a superhighway and just set it on fire, and
Let's
everyone
put
can drive through it.
everything. Let's put all of our eggs in one basket, and let's lay some more eggs to fill the basket with.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the one bill I'm going to pass this year, so I need to make sure everything on my legislative priority list is on it.
Everyone who lives off of this interstate will be able to have blazing fast internet.
Yeah. You can just plug an Ethernet cable into the underside of the highway.
Hey, almost people would love that though, so I doubt that would happen.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh my god.
1,200 foot wide, 8 lanes, super
I can't
highway.
I can't wrap my head around that.
That carries utilities. That I think is the craziest part about that. You want exposed utility lines just out in the air?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if you want them under a road, doesn't make any more sense.
No,
And gas lines, because nothing could go wrong with that.
no, you couldn't
Next
just
to electric.
If you were a terrorist, you couldn't just shoot a gas line and blow up a portion of the 1,200
Oh my god.
8-lane superhighway.
Just just redline your car and drive into the side.
Really?
Yeah. This person was the Department of Energy cabinet chair
Yep.
for Donald Trump.
That was my favorite appointment.
I can't begin to express like the amount of disdain I have for Texas politicians is it god.
It was almost as good as Ben Carson as Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah.
No, he was housing and urban development.
Oh, you're right.
Even crazier.
Genuinely
that's
much
right.
dumber.
Health and Human Services kind of would have made sense because he
You're
was a
right.
surgeon. Instead, he was put in charge of HUD.
God, I forgot about that.
And Rick Perry, with his genius infrastructure plans, is sidelined and shoved over in the EPA.
He could have made the Texas Trans Corridor happen.
I'm pretty sure Rick Perry was asked what the EPA did whenever he was running for president, and he said he didn't know.
He did. He 100%
He
did.
did.
Yeah, and then Trump made him head of the EPA. Yeah.
And it's because of that we have Greg Abbott now. So
I was thinking about this the other day, or maybe it was today. I don't know if I can handle another like Trump election cycle thing going on. It's so much in this country, dude. Election years are hell.
Mm-hmm.
So bad.
I have friends that moved over to Scotland in like 2007, I think. And I am so envious of them. I just, because like I've tried to get international spots like through the bank, and it's like they don't want anybody from this country, and I don't blame them.
So as a young single guy, I am considering moving to the Faroe Islands, Svalbard, or the Orkneys, all of which are municipalities which will pay young people to move there.
Faroe Islands, I would love to go there.
But then you are literally on a rock in the middle of nowhere.
Svalbard in particular is a tough sell.
Yeah, I think I could handle it, but I don't want to, you know?
Well, the Faroe Islands, like you got Iceland is like a stone's throw away. They like everybody.
That's true. And reading the ice shirt, it's really making Iceland and the whole surrounding region sound pretty idyllic.
You could go work at the Global Seed Vault, Will. That's in Svalbard.
I think you kind of need to be like an ecologist to do that.
I think so,
It's pretty high stakes up there. Like if you know, I go in there and contaminate something, humanity may die.
Well, we're already on that track anyway.
True.
So.
But also, if they're paying people to move there, maybe they'll also pay you to become an ecologist.
Right.
It's possible.
Right.
Although I do think they're paying people to move there because I think you mostly will live off of canned herring and expect no electricity.
Yeah. Or if you go to Iceland, you can have what is it, Hakarl, the fermented shark meat that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as part of that Faroe Islands program, because I remember looking this up once, they'll pay you to just watch sheep. Like that's the job the government will give you. You just monitor their sheep population and make sure not too many of them die.
Shepherding is hardcore.
It is.
See, but it's not shepherding. It's
just counting.
There
were 30 yesterday. There's 30 today. I did a good job.
They literally call it the Sheep View program. I'm looking at it right now. It's not even like taking care of them necessarily. You're just taking a look.
Oh my God, I'll do it. Can I take my family?
Oh, that's a good question.
They have the National Library there. My wife could do that.
There you go.
I got to sign up for this.
The Faroe Islands tourism site does properly implement GDPR-aware cookie stuff.
We should just all go to the Faroe Islands.
Yeah, it'll be the one live show we do.
And then we'll just not go back anywhere. We'll just stay there.
You stay at the Faroe Islands. We'll combine our collective collection of books.
Yeah.
And then we'll spend the rest of our lives sheep counting.
We counted the sheep. We can go record now. Everything is good.
So wait, just to get this straight, we're gonna go to the place where the only internet connection is satellite driven to do our live show.
Yeah, it tracks. We'll do it all on reel to reel, and then we'll mail it to somebody to process digitally, and it'll take a little bit more time, but it'll be like, we can call it artisanal podcasting.
I think Hello Internet did something like that. They produced a vinyl episode.
Really?
Yeah.
They do have a Burger King in the Faroe Islands.
Nice.
All right. I'm signing up.
That's all we need.
I'm just saying, I worked there for a few years, so I think I have an in.
That's true. They're going to eventually need a new manager.
I'll just be like, I know these systems. I know how to make the burgers.
Right.
Bacon fries, baby.
Have you ever worked at a Burger King?
Have I really? Yeah, I did. For
No, I mean, I'm imagining you filling out a job
Oh,
application.
as my resume for the Faroe Islands.
Yeah.
I worked at Burger King for many years.
You don't
I knew the
speak
secret
Danish?
I mean, I can figure it out. It's not that hard.
I don't think you could, actually.
I probably couldn't. I'm terrible with language.
No, not about you. Danish is a dying language.
Oh, that's true. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't they speak like a particular dialect of Danish that's only spoken on the Faroe Islands and the Faroe
I
Islands?
think so. I'm looking at their Wikipedia, and I think I just saw something about that.
So you don't just have to learn Danish; you have to learn an obscure version of Danish.
Yeah. I'm not good at that. I can't do.
You could also just make a rule that in order to order at your Burger King, they have to order in English.
Faroese
So-
is the primary and official language of the country, whereas Danish is taught in schools and can be used by the Faroese government in public relations with public services providing Danish translations of documents on request. Faroese belongs to the North Germanic language branch and is descended from Old Norse, being most closely related to Icelandic.
Hey, at least it wouldn't be 110 every day during the summer.
Yeah,
That's true.
It would be negative 110 at least a few days every winter.
Wow, oh man. The record high there is 71.6.
I'm okay with that.
I am totally fine. Now the record low is 12.2. Looks like it's not terrible.
That's Kelvin?
Fahrenheit. We got
Wow.
lower than that here a couple years ago.
Yeah, it gets lower than that here every year.
I'm all for this. I gotta get in touch with my Burger King people.
Faroese has a really limited phonology. So we could probably pronounce it at least.
Well,
There
that's
is-
good.
There is Faroese literature, so we could maybe just work that into the podcast and be like, yeah, we'll
Right.
talk about these books.
Maybe that's our in over there. Be like, give us jobs at the tourism department, and we'll talk about Faroese literature.
It's a relatively new thing, really. It developed in the past 100 to 200 years.
There you go. It's in need of
This is
people to look
fascinating.
at it critically.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, are you guys reading anything interesting right now?
I'm trying to
Go ahead.
I'm trying to work through all the Hainish cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. I bought because there's a Library of America. There's a 2-volume set of all of the Hainish stuff, and I've read a lot of it already. But I bought the second volume of it because it's all the Half Price Books had, and I was going to return it today, but then I didn't finish it in time. And I looked it up online, and it's about the same price to either buy that or buy like the books I would need. I'm trying to do that. I was taking a break from the Illuminatus stuff, but I'll probably go back to it. But yeah, I really enjoy Ursula K. Le Guin a lot. She's one of my probably favorite sci-fi authors.
Yeah, I actually just picked up Left Hand of Darkness in the library. I haven't read that in a long, long time. So
That was my intro to her.
I just finished The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. That was really good. I read one of his other books that was way darker than Black Tongue Thief, but was still really good. Black Tongue Thief was like a good mix of grimdark fantasy and humor. He has a side job at Renfests as an insulter, so a lot of that I felt a lot of that in that book particularly. It was a fun book. Like for a dark fantasy, it was really well done.
I have a chapter and a half left of the Iliad before I'm done, and I have like 60 pages left in Fire and Blood before I'm done with that. Which has been good. I am glad that Hector's dead, so I can stop screaming about how much I hate him to my coworkers. After that, I'm gonna read Guards.
Oh, I love that one. That was so good.
By Terry Pratt.
I did also start reading Underworld by Don DeLillo, which I'm really enjoying.
Yeah.
Oh,
I love that
I
book.
was-
I love that book.
I haven't read it.
Good.
I wanted something like it's been on my shelf for a while, and I've been watching a lot of baseball. So I was like, I just need to start this because I need more baseball in my life, and it's absolutely delivering. So
Yeah, it's probably his best book, I would say.
that's what I've heard.
It's his most like virtuosic, definitely virtuosic.
I'll always have a special place in my heart for Cosmopolis, but it's hard to.
What do you think of the
argue.
movie?
I actually don't hate the movie adaptation. I think that it unfortunately suffers from the fact that it's probably too faithful to the book, and that the dialogue being spoken is just Don DeLillo's dialogue, and it sounds fucking crazy coming out of like a real people's mouths most of the time. But otherwise, I think it's a fairly solid adaptation of a book that isn't, upon first glance, filmable.
Yeah, I'm really choosy about post Underworld DeLillo. But I don't really like the book that much. But then I've seen the movie I think 3 times, and like the first time I watched it, I was really excited. So I'm very into Cronenberg and pretty solidly into DeLillo. But I hated Cosmopolis the first time, hated it the second time, and then I just rewatched it the other day. So I'm trying to work through Cronenberg's movies, and it's available on streaming. And I actually enjoyed it a fair amount the third time, which was surprising to me because the first few times I really did not enjoy it, but this third time it seemed to kind of click a lot more for me.
Yeah, I think it's just disorienting because he didn't change much of the dialogue, so it's just you're hearing. Yeah, I think that's the issue. Is there's not a lot of rhythm to how the characters are speaking because it's not naturalistic at all.
Yeah, and I think I just didn't have enough life experience whenever I read the book and watched it the first few times. Like,
Oh yeah,
I had no experience with the stock market at that point, and other stuff. Just none of it was really clicking. Even like some of the the Marxist stuff went over my head because I hadn't read the Communist Manifesto.
yeah. I was in a similar place to you when I read the book because I like my two, I guess, moments of activation as far as like postmodern literature or trying to take a look at literary fiction from a more serious lens was reading Inherent Vice and then reading Cosmopolis, where like both of those I came away from them being like, I don't know what it is that I just read, but it was freaking incredible, and I need to like know more about it and figure out how this works. So it definitely didn't totally connect the first time I read it, but I knew there was something to be mined out of that book when I finished reading it the first time.
Yeah, I need to see that movie. I haven't. I've only seen a handful of Cronenberg's later stuff. I liked History of Violence a lot, and Eastern Promises, I think, was the last one I saw of his.
Those are both good. Yeah,
But
Yeah, those are
I'm
good.
way more familiar with his early, like Videodrome is one of my favorite
great film.
just movies in general.
Yeah, I have a very intense Videodrome, like long sleeve tee I bought off Etsy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I might send you a pic on the group chat because I'm really proud of it.
I would
Yeah.
love to see that because that sounds like a cool shirt.
Weirdly, I feel like you and I talked about Cosmopolis at some point, Cody, because I brought up the fact that there is a Don DeLillo adaptation prior to White Noise.
I think
and
we
it's done
did
by
talk about it.
David
Yeah,
Cronenberg, and
that sounds
you
right.
found that insane. Which
Oh, and
is
DeLillo also wrote a movie called Game 6 that I used to own. I owned it on DVD in college because I was very, very into DeLillo in college. And I ended up getting rid of the DVD, like selling it. But yeah, it is definitely super odd to see.
I remember that movie.
Yeah, it's a really weird movie. It didn't click with me then. I want to watch it, but it's not easy to find.
Michael Keaton was in that, right?
Yes,
and
you are
Robert Downey
correct.
Jr.
Okay, hold on. I gotta look this up. Yeah. Oh my. Okay, yeah. And Yola Tango did the score for it. I remember that.
Actually, I didn't know who they were at that time, so I don't know. But yeah,
I remember. I feel like I saw this when it came out, and I never watched it again.
yeah, I watched it one night with some friends while I was in college, and it didn't click for any of us, and I felt like how it is when you're younger, especially, and you put something on for people and no one likes it, and you start getting all in your feelings. And
I know that way too well.
People start questioning your sanity and stuff like that.
Yep. I can't tell you how many people I tried to sit down and watch. Magnolia and Mulholland Drive were the two I remember where I showed a bunch of people, and every time it was just met with like, "What the hell?" And it just made me not want to watch movies with people ever again.
You definitely not have to know who you're watching a movie with. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I just never could get any of my friends really into, especially Lynch, but a lot of them were never really into PTA either.
Yeah. As far as to your point about late Cronenberg, like everything post Cosmopolis, I would say is varying degrees of not good.
Oh, really?
His son Brandon Cronenberg is becoming an interesting director, though.
Yeah, I love
things about. Yeah,
Infinity Pool is really good.
That's the one I've heard was really good. That's his like most recent one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's last year.
Mia Goth's performance in that movie is like astounding. Like I was like, my jaw dropped, and like she's just like, I kept on like, she sustains like this like character near the end of the movie that like I kept on being like, she has to drop this character. Like there's no way she can keep up this intensity, and she just keeps it up, and it's one of the best acting performances I've ever seen by her.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I mean, people always act like it's ridiculous that, look, when you really love a movie, it just hurts when you put it on and nobody respects it enough to give it a fair chance. Like every time I put on 2006 The Wicker Man.
The Nicolas Cage one? With the bees?
Yeah. I do actually enjoy that movie. But I also have not forced people to watch it because I'm not an asshole.
I saw it in high school, I think, with my girlfriend at the time, like after a school dance, we went to go see that, I want to say.
What a strange choice.
Not a good date movie.
No, I mean, that's true. I don't remember what I was thinking. I mean, it's high school.
No, I mean, it's like a horror movie remake. It's just that, like, the whole movie is, for as shit as it is, it does have weird things to say about gender.
Yeah, I watched the first one pretty recently. Within the last year, I think I watched the original.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed it a fair amount.
There's Nicolas Cage just is something. I don't know. He made
a lot of money.
Really good movies, and he's made some. I've watched that man chew so much scenery that sometimes I just have to sit back and enjoy just watching him.
Yeah, I'm a Cage defender. I mean, who else could have just sucker punched an old woman? So believable.
Or a bear.
Or a bear. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's definitely not a bad actor. He just owes the IRS a lot of money.
He just has to do things. He has to debase himself for our viewing pleasure for the next 20 years.
He's got to earn back that burial pyramid in Louisiana somehow.
Didn't he buy a dinosaur?
He was ordered to give that back to the government whatever country it was.
It was illegally smuggled out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The thing is, he is a good actor.
He is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Leaving Las Vegas was great. He absolutely deserved the Oscar for that.
I really love his performance in the movie Joe, which is an underseen film of his, but it's an adaptation of a book of the same name. That was when he was doing only direct-to-DVD stuff for a while, so that was like a breath of fresh air when I got a chance to see that movie. But yeah, he's so good. He was great in Pig. That was another recent one.
Yeah.
He's able to do camp as well because the unbearable weight of massive talent is great.
We watched the first National Treasure because we wanted to show our kids, and it's a fun dumbass movie, but it's in the same with like I will defend The Rock until I die. I love that movie.
That's how I feel about Con Air. It's not
Con
a
Air
good.
was another one.
It's not a good movie, but I enjoy
Oh.
the hell out of Con Air.
When put the bunny down.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well,
Every time.
he's basically been typecast as his character from Con Air and National Treasure since he made those movies.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
if like he was in this one called The Trust, which did not get any fanfare. It's not a particularly good movie, but it starred him and Elijah Wood, and Elijah Wood played a ne'er-do-well stoner CSI guy, and Nick Cage played like a down-to-earth nerdy family man, which was so out of type for him. It was incredible. Not a good movie to watch coming down from acid, I'll say.
I wouldn't think so.
I'm going through his filmography. Adaptation was great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Matchstick Men was pretty good. Lord of War was really good. I liked that one a lot. As much as I hate Jared Leto, I liked Lord of War.
Well, Jared Leto gets exploded by a grenade in that film, so
That's true. That is true.
A good piece of celluloid fodder for Jared Leto haters.
Oh, he was in the Teen Titans Go movie. I forgot about that.
He's Superman, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Because he was also almost Superman in the Tim Burton failed Superman attempt.
That's apparently y'all have seen the screenshots from the new Flash movie.
From the new Flash movie.
Yeah, there's like some terrible CGI that's like a reference to the Cage almost being Superman, where like Cage is like in the multiverse as Superman in that movie, but it's not him. It's like a CGI version.
They couldn't just put that picture of him in costume,
just
dump it in there somewhere.
I haven't actually seen it. I've just seen stuff on Reddit about it, but I'm 95% sure it's actually in the movie.
I wouldn't be surprised. All the deep fake weird stuff they're doing now.
There's no guarantee that it would be good, but I would like to see a Nicolas Cage interpretation of Willy Wonka.
That'd be interesting. I honestly more interested in that than Timothy Chalamet, who I do like, but he kind of grates on me the more I see him in stuff, the more I see him like in like the media.
I
think Timothy Chalamet's a good actor, but he's so wrong for that part.
He's not. Yeah.
I don't like him in that part.
Like he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't give off any whimsy in the trailer. He gives off a Hot Topic employee who's in the last hour of his shift, and he's excited to talk to you about shirts.
That's just kind of his vibe in general.
So I'm imagining Nick Cage as Wonka, and all that my brain is doing is basically giving me High from Raising Arizona.
See, I was thinking Vampire's Kiss Cage as Willy Wonka.
That could be too.
That would work.
Completely unhinged, just over the top kind of thing would actually suit that character pretty well.
Yeah, like he could do the over the top unhinged stuff, but he can also bring the undercurrent of real violence that exists within the Gene Wilder version of Willy Wonka.
If you okay, hear me out. If we could get David Lynch to direct this, I think we could do something with this. You could capture the sheer horror of the tunnel scene that was in the original, that real acid trip kind of thing, But Lynch also has a good sense of humor, and I think he's worked with Cage before. So
that's true. I think we found what really we need. Now that the Barbenheimer thing is over and we don't have any movies to look forward to as a society, I think maybe we could get together as a society and push forward excitement for a David Lynch directed Nicolas Cage starring Willy Wonka film.
Willy Wonka, yeah.
Well, in the Chalamet Wonka is going to be a prequel, so I suppose this should be Willy Wonka cleaning up the messes he's made throughout his life after handing over the factory.
Yeah.
So then it's
Bond.
It becomes a quadrilogy at that point, where you get to see Timothy Chalamet play the young Wonka. You get to see fucking Johnny Depp play a middle-ish aged Wonka, and then you get to watch Gene Wilder, and then you get to watch Nicolas Cage.
I'm so in favor of this happening.
All right, let's get writing.
Start writing some letters. There's a writer's strike on though, so it's going to take a while. But
that's true. It'd be scabs.
I'm not part of the Writers Guild,
right?
So I'll scab
none of
this
us are. I'll put our heads together on this script.
Let's scab for this important piece of art.
And look, A24 still has access to SAG because they're complying with the union's demands. So therefore, if we could get A24 to get David Lynch to do it,
I think if anyone's going to release this movie, A24 might be the right place for it.
Probably. Then they could also get the actors. So yeah, in A24 produced, David Lynch directed, Nicolas Cage starring, late personal crisis Willy Wonka film. Yeah.
So I think one thing about this is that people are gonna hear the pitch and they're gonna think something like that Winnie the Pooh movie that came out.
Oh, Blood and Honey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where it's essentially just a not self-serious parody.
Mm-hmm.
I think what needs to be made clear is that we're talking about a real movie about real drama. We need the Leaving Las Vegas Cage. We need sincerity from him. We need genuine regret at enslaving an entire tribe of South Americans.
That's why he's perfect. He has the range.
This is true.
Has the range.
Perhaps we could get like some industry juice if we said it was an adaptation of Heart of Darkness.
Wait, no, that's what Wonka's gonna be.
Yeah.
Timothy Chalamet is Kurtz.
A very young, pre-interstation Colonel Kurt.
Yeah, full head of hair.
We got to make this happen. This is our ticket to the Faroe Islands. We bank on this, make enough money that we can just get over it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good ballpark for the success we can expect from this kind of a project. Faroe Islands money.
And, Faroe Islands has like a national football club, so we could turn that money into a sponsorship for their stadium, because, like, who's sponsoring the Faroe Islands stadium? And then we can reap the continuous profit of whatever money that brings in afterwards.
No more counting sheep for us.
Right.
Yeah, but then Klaus Thorsen will probably kill us for taking his ad spot for his herring.
I was going to say drywall business, but he could probably do herring as well.
Drywall, herring, he's a handy man. Klaus Thorsen.
I feel like we should include this at the end of the episode so that if we have any Faroe Islands based listeners, they can.
You know what? I did not ever stop the recording. I'm just realizing. So guess what's
Yeah,
going in.
I was thinking about that. What parts of this are going to make it in or not? Or
the whole movie. The whole movie. TM. This is our movie. This is we just wrote our meal ticket, guys.
I think so.
Our herring ticket.
Yep. Well, all of our meals will be herring going forward, so.
Herring and unctuous sheep fat.
And Burger King.
And Burger to break the monotony, obviously. I'm tired of herring. Let's go get a Whopper.
You could have 2 days of each food and then a fast day just to recover.
Are we sure that Faroese Burger King's burgers are not made out of herring?
I genuinely don't know.
Oh, I gotta Google this now to see if there's a website for that.
That is one thing I've experienced in Europe is like burgers. The meat is like more than half like soy.
They have a website on, or there's a thing on Faroe Islands website. I'm trying to bring it up.
Oh, they're closed right now.
It's the only Burger King in the Faroe Islands, in case you thought there might be more than one.
Want to stick to something you already know? Visit or drive through the only Burger King in the Faroe Islands for their famous burger menus and other meals. Not the food, just the menus.
Oh, here we go. I found the website. They have actual. This is all not okay.
Is
In
it
Faroese.
Cookies. Sure. I will click the green button because I don't know what it does. The picture's pretty good. There's a dude with the burger. It looks photoshopped as hell, but there it is. They have sushi. That's on the menu. There's a section on here that just says "Name it."
Name it?
It literally says "Name it."
Like nom
Like NAME space IT.
They
Wow.
do have a plant-based version of the chicken sandwich.
In the Faroe Islands?
Yes.
I tried to translate this and it just says it's. Oh, maybe it did do it already. Okay. It still says "Name it," and everything underneath it just says "height." There's something else that says "Skulk Man." True fashion. I don't know what's going on here.
Skulk Man?
There's one called The Body Shop and one called Nips. Oh, and here's a listing for Burger King. This is separate businesses, I think. I think that's what I'm looking
You
at.
can text the Burger King.
Uh-huh.
There's on the Burger King Faroe Islands website, the kids meals or the King Junior meals or whatever that's subheaded for Bjorn. Just
It's only for him.
just I would imagine that translates to like for child or like for offspring
For bear, I think.
or that.
Oh my god.
Forrige skotskagen och läxtäta burgarmastova.
There's something called a buff sandwich that I need to translate this description.
Man,
What is head?
I have no idea.
A historic meeting between American fast food and a Danish favorite: steak, pickles, onions, roasted onions, ketchup, mustard, and remoulade. That is their signature dish for the Burger King version of, or the Faroe Islands version Burger King, or maybe just Danish.
Well.
Oh, Google Translate does not support Faroese.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, that explains the height thing.
Yep.
Oh, if I hit all menu, it just takes me to the regular Danish menu. That's not what I want.
I'm curious how Burger King got this to happen because there's no McDonald's there, so they have no competition.
They have what looks like cheese curds, but the cheese is melted on the inside, and it says chili cheese 4-pack. They have just bone-in chicken wings at the Faroe Islands Burger King.
Hell yeah.
They have curly fries at the Faroe Islands Burger King.
Is margarita the pizza?
Maybe.
It has to be, right?
Yeah.
They have...
no, there was a Danish queen named Margarita. Maybe there's something to do there.
Their dipping sauces are crazy. They have a barbecue sauce. That's pretty normal. They have 2 versions of béarnaise sauce. They have curry. They have a garlic aioli and a spicy cheese. They have sour cream and onion dip, and they have sweet and sour.
Interesting.
They have milkshakes.
They also have skilling.
Nice. You can get an apple tart. They have a fish sandwich. Does Burger King normally have a fish sandwich? I feel like they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did.
They did.
It was,
Okay.
especially during Lent, it was very popular.
Yeah.
They have a gourmet menu.
Ooh.
The Gourmet Grill Barbecue Cheeseburger. I can't read Danish, so I'm going to have to put this in and translate.
I honestly do not trust a gourmet Burger King menu.
But it's
well,
not
you shouldn't.
American. I feel a little bit better about it not being an American version.
See, here's the thing. I trust McDonald's outside of the US to be better.
Yeah.
I trust Burger King to be worse.
I have been to the Burger King in London, and it's different, but it wasn't worse. I wouldn't say it was better. It was on par, if anything. Maybe slightly worse.
I had McDonald's in Morocco, and it was exactly the same.
Nice.
Which, yeah, right?
Safe choice.
Well, nothing else was open, so.
The description of the Burger King's Gourmet Grill Barbecue is: make your taste buds explode with Burger King's Gourmet Grill Barbecue. Savor every bite of the succulent, flame-grilled premium beef grilled to perfection and served with bacon slices, creamy mayo, roasted onions, fresh lettuce, juicy tomatoes, and cheese, all wrapped up in a soft bistro bun. It's the ultimate burger experience you won't want to miss. See, what about that sounds unappealing, Will?
Well, frankly,
Fair
it's
point.
the choice of the phrase creamy mayonnaise.
They appear to be into chili cheese as a flavor in the Faroe Islands, because a lot of menu items have that listed on it.
Is it black
Like
pepper?
the powdered chili cheese, like on Fritos?
I don't think so, because like they have chili cheese fries. They have
Also actual chili, which, okay.
yeah, they have like a chili cheese burger. They have a chili cheese chicken sandwich. They have a chili cheeseburger. They have a chili cheese Whopper. And then they have these like weird deep fried cheese curds, but filled with chili cheese instead of a cheese curd. It just seems to be something they're into over there. How'd they figure out about that?
I don't know. Maybe enough Americans have moved there to watch sheep.
Or showed up and
Brought over-
demanded that.
I'm not counting your sheep unless you give me some goddamn chili cheese.
I can't imagine there are a lot of tourists, though.
No, I can't imagine there are.
They do have Thai food in the Faroe Islands.
Nice.
Well, that makes sense, actually. Do y'all know about the Thai government's thing?
No.
No.
They basically provide very low interest business loans to immigrants to open Thai restaurants, and they're happy to offer the business loan to Vietnamese families. That's why a lot of the time they're like Cambodian or Laotian or Vietnamese people running Thai restaurants, is because they know that if they contact the Thai government, as long as they just call it Thai food, they'll get some really great financial assistance.
There's a restaurant just called Seven. Chinese food.
Well, I'm sure that after the remake of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Nordic nations became much bigger fans of Fincher.
Sure. You think it's like a theme
it's
restaurant?
a tribute, yeah. Except Chinese food.
Well, it's the gluttony scene from Seven.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Chinese
gotcha.
food.
Makes sense.
They just tie you down to a chair and put you in a shitty basement somewhere.
For American tourists.
Yeah.